The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Howdy. Good to see y'all. Probably heard about the pastor. Somebody said, I've never seen my pastor's eyes, what color they are. The other guy said, well, why not? Well, he said, when he prays, his eyes are closed, and when he preaches, my eyes are closed. So I'm just telling you, I got hazel eyes in case Let's pray. Father in heaven, I'm so grateful today that you are the great God and almighty King. I thank you, Lord, for this precious day. I thank you, Lord, for the good spring rain that we receive from you, and how you uniquely every day teach us in so many ways how much you love us. Father, I thank you for these legislators. Lord, the respect and the admiration that I have for them is really genuine. Lord, for these good men and women that give up their personal lives to serve others. Sometimes I feel like we're hardly worthy of such good people that work so hard. I ask your blessing upon them and their career and their livelihood back home. I ask your blessing upon their families that sacrifice so much, that don't get to see moms and dads almost 5 months of the year and 5 days a week. It is a challenge. And they do miss their moms and dads, husband and wives and partners. I ask your blessing upon the entire families. I pray today that you will help us as citizens, Lord, to stop and thank you for our servants. And Lord, to think before we speak and before we criticize. And Father, help us that when we have a problem, we speak with respect, with courtesy and kindness. So today, Father, I just pray very simply for your blessing upon this session, to give wisdom and patience, long-suffering, love and joy and peace, and the perseverance to be about your work, to do it well with noble spirit. And we give you the thanks. In faith, we pray these things in your almighty name. Amen.
Members, our House Chaplain for today is our old friend and former House Chaplain, Reverend Lonnie Titus. Please remain standing and join me as Sarah leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. Call the member from Olmsted, Representative Norton. For what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the House Gallery, we're joined by 8 teams from around the state who have been selected by the Boys and Girls Club for their contributions to their families, schools, communities, and Boys and Girls Club while overcoming personal challenges and obstacles. Tonight, one of these youth will be selected to represent Minnesota at a regional competition, and 5 regional winners will ultimately compete for the National Youth of the Year in Washington, D.C. These youth represent personal statements and underwent interviews from a panel of judges this morning. and the Minnesota winner will be announced this evening. Unfortunately, our House floor session will conflict with that, so we will not be able to attend. Boys and Girls Clubs operate around the state, serving tens of thousands of youth per year. They have an incredibly positive impact on the youth that they serve, working with them to reach their fullest potentials. As their motto says, great futures start here. These youth are shining evidence of that, and please join me in welcoming them, and I'm going to give you their names, and there are just a few. Mariah, and you're going to have to forgive me if I get your names. Mariah, who's with the Boys and Girls Clubs of 10,000 Lakes. Shayna, Boys and Girls Club of White Earth Reservation. Christina, Boys and Girls Club of Detroit Lakes. Tyrone, Boys and Girls Club of Rochester, yay. Cham, Boys and Girls Club of Central Minnesota. Kaylee, Red Lake Nation, Boys and Girls Club. Mai, Boys and Girls Club of the Twin Cities. And Alexander, Boys and Girls Club of Northland. Members, please join me in congratulating and wishing them well.
Thank you, Representative Norton, and welcome, students, and congratulations. The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it is a sincere honor and a privilege today to welcome and introduce Mr. Ken Kruger. He's a man who valiantly served our country in World War II from 1943 to 1945. He was a motor messenger and delivered messages from Patton's 3rd Army headquarters to the front lines. Mr. Kruger courageously served in Normandy, North France, Rhineland, and Central European campaigns, where he was awarded both the Bronze Star and Good Conduct medals. Members, today we are celebrating Mr. Kruger's outstanding service and commitment to our country. In addition to that, he is a deserved recipient of the Knight of Legion of Honor Medal, which is France's highest military honor. This is an honor typically reserved only for French nationals, but Mr. Kruger's generous service, his valiant service, and his sacrifice to this country also deems him well for this very high honor. Members, I present to you Mr. Ken Kruger.
Thank you, Representative Sanders, and on behalf of a very grateful state and nation, thank you, Mr. Kruger. The clerk will read the journal for the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th Session, 2012, 89th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Tuesday, March 20th, 2012.
There are no objections. Further reading the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will stand as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objections, the journal stands as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Call a member from Freeborn, Representative Murray. For what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, ice cream is good every day, but today, to usher in the first full day of spring, it's Dilly Bar Day at the Capitol. So all members, please join us in the retiring room for Dilly Bar.
Reports of standing committees and divisions. Copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there are no objections, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objections, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading House File 682.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 749.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 876.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2450.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2623.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2626.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2640.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2650.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2658.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2749.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2795.
Second reading. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading Senate File 1135.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 1492.
Second reading. Introduction and first reading of House files. The following House files have been offered for introduction. Today, the Chief Clerk report these House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 2946 through 2954.
First reading House File 2946 through 2954. Fiscal calendar. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, Holbert for the Committee on Ways and Means calls up for immediate consideration House File 2337. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2337 on the fiscal calendar for today, the second engrossment, an act relating to financing of state and local government.
Calling the member from Fillmore, the tax chair, Representative Davids, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2337 on the House Research Bill Summary, you'll see it's the Tax Relief and Job Creation Bill. I'd like to go through each article, and then, Mr. Speaker and members, I will stand for questions. Article 1, Property Taxes. It reduces and phases out the statewide property tax levy on commercial and industrial properties and seasonal or recreational property. For the commercial industrial property taxes payable in 2013, this bill would reduce the class rate tax on the first $150,000 of property value by 70% of the total property value. Starting in 2014, the entire levy would be reduced by 8.33% until it's fully phased out over a 12-year period. The automatic inflator is also frozen as to prevent the levy from increasing. It increases the target property tax refund program temporarily. It would increase the percentage the state pays over 12% from 60% to 90% for taxes paid in 2012 only. It provides a property tax credit towards producers still under testing requirements for bovine tuberculosis. There are 3 local government aid changes. It temporarily increases the local government aid for the city of Tamarack by $12,000. That was a McElpatrick bill for Tamarack regarding their sewer treatment plant. It freezes local government aid payments for cities over 5,000 for paid 2013 and 2012 levels. Cities under 5,000 receive the formula amount for paid 2013. If that is greater than the paid 2012 amount, they get whatever is greater. It allows seniors to defer property tax interest fees to local governments. The state picks up that interest cost. It creates a Truth in Taxation Notice Task Force. In particular, it would address issues relating to special taxing districts. That was the inclusion of House File 2381, a Runbeck bill. The bill would allow the Cook Ambulance area in the City of Orr to use prior levy authority to purchase replacement parts and machines for their ambulances. The previous authority allowed only the purchase of a new ambulance. That was House File 2297, Representative Dill. Border cities damaged by the 2009 and 2010 floods can elect to allow newly constructed residential properties to be exempt from property taxes for 2 years. It would allow Marshall County residents displaced by the 2009 flood to continue having their farm listed as residential homestead even if they're not living on that property, if they're within 50 miles and still a resident of Minnesota. That was Representative Keel's bill. Lowers the interest rate for delinquent property tax payments to local governments. That's a very important provision brought to the Tax Committee by Representative Rukavina. Representative Rukavina pointed out that under current law, the interest rates for delinquent property taxes are set between 10 and 14%. Many counties are going to be receiving more property than they'd like, and we put it from 4 to 7%. I believe there's an amendment coming to simply put it at 2% above prime so it can fluctuate with the prime rate. It lowers mining provisions. It lowers the mining occupation tax on non-ferrous metals from 2.45 to 1.45. So we have several mining provisions in there. It makes changes to school distribution of taconite production taxes. And there's some other issues as far as the mining area goes. There's a renter's credit change. We reduce, it was 19% this year, or last year, 17% this year. It goes to 15%, from 17 to 15%. It also changes the eligibility for this credit. Previously, the credit would be available to those with incomes around $54,000. We've changed it for seniors and those with disabilities. The income limit is $40,000. Non-seniors, non-disabled, $25,000. That's Article 1. Article 2, income and corporate taxes, makes various changes to the angel investment credit program. We're looking at some of that going to rural Minnesota. Representative Downey was instrumental in that bill, and the rural Minnesota part was Representative Murray. Brought that to us. Representative Mazerall had a very interesting bill. It creates a net operating loss transfer credit. This credit allows qualified emerging business in the biotech area to sell their net operating loss credit to a business. This credit would apply towards the purchaser's corporate franchise tax. Very important, members, it creates a veterans jobs tax credit similar to the federal veterans jobs tax credit. That was brought to us by Representative Bills. It replaces the foreign operating corporation tax credit for a credit on the corporate franchise tax. The credit would equal either what they would have received under the old FOC provision or their statewide property tax liability, whichever is less. It eliminates the double deduction for real estate investment corporations, also known as REITs. Article 3, sales and use taxes. I'll go through those. It provides an upfront sales tax exemption on capital equipment purchases for all small businesses under 20 employees and $1 million of sales. It eliminates the June accelerated sales tax remittance permanently. It excludes from sales tax the sale of lodging and taxable food and beverages between established religious order and an affiliated higher education institution. That was brought to us by Representative Gottwald, Representative O'Driscoll, and I want to thank Representative Hosch for his work on this provision. At the request of the Rochester City Council and others, I should say, there's a food and beverage tax, placing it all on their lodging tax instead, and it goes towards paying the bonds if there is construction of the Mayo Civic Center expansion. That was House File 2352, a Quam bill. It allows specific uses for Clearwater's voter-approved sales tax, extends the period with voter approval sales tax in St. Cloud and surrounding cities for specific projects listed in the referendum question. That was House File 2535, O'Driscoll. It alters the distribution of the Rochester sales tax to include an additional city that we missed last year, as the city of Wanamingo would now qualify for the Good Neighbor policy. It modifies the use of local sales tax revenues in the city of Clearwater, including projects at the specified parks and trails. Increases the percentage tax credit for qualified research and development costs. And members, if you go to Article 4, TIF provisions, TIF jobs bill extension. The bill would extend for 18 months the original 2010 authorization for economic development TIF districts. That's the Crawford bill that applies statewide. TIF pooling for foreclosed housing, a Nelson bill, House File 2542. There's Oakdale language for TIF districts. I'll just kind of go through the cities, and if you have specific questions, we can certainly talk about that later. Apple Valley TIF, Maple Grove TIF, Dakota County Community Development Agency TIF, Bloomington Central Station, extension for 4 years, the Mall of America Phase 2. My original bill had a 20-year extension. The bill has a 10-year extension now. Before granting extension of authority, an additional $5 million of expenditures of tax increments the city would be required to make the statutory but-for finding. And approval of the special law would be required to be made by the city, county, and school district. The city of Brooklyn Park grants an extension of the 5-year rule for a district in Brooklyn Park through July 1st, 2014. There are some miscellaneous provisions. Itasca County bonding for a nursing home, Woodbury bonds for a sports center, increase the production limit for small brewers, receiving the small brewers credit from 100,000 barrels worldwide to 250,000 barrels. Very important, provides a grant for Greater Minnesota Internship Program with businesses, $1.25 million a year, to foster and retain talent in Greater Minnesota. Prohibits the Commissioner of Department of Revenue from requiring distributors of alcoholic beverages to include copies of retailer sales tax exemption certificates. It extends the St. Paul's Capital Improvement Bonding Authority to 2024. That was, I believe, a Mahoney bill. We did not go from 20 to 30 million, if I recall, but we did extend that. It allows the city of Vergas to authorize an aggregate tax. It would allow all units of government, whether in the metro or greater Minnesota, the same time frame to hold land for the purpose of selling for economic development. That was House File 2849, a Banyan bill. Creates a tax reform commission study group. That was House File 1822, a $25,000 appropriation. That was a Representative Loon bill. Allocation to border city enterprise zones. It allocates $150,000 for a border city enterprise zone and border city development zone tax reductions. That also has to do with basically subsidizing work comp rates in Minnesota, which are quite a bit higher than across the border as a rule in North Dakota. And it transfers $4.3 million from a Department of Revenue fund to the general fund. That was a fund that was supposed to be spent operating overseeing TIF districts. That fund is accumulated, and that goes into this bill. And so, members, that is a description of House File 2337. Mr. Speaker, I would stand for any questions on the Omnibus Tax Bill.
There are amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the first amendment.
Kath and others moving to amend House File 2337, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A40.
Call the member from Steele, Representative Kath, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Before you is an amendment that Representative Murdoch and myself have put before you that deals with our two counties and some storm damage that happened within our fairgrounds complex. Both of our counties are seeking permission to be able to be the lender for those projects and to improve those or do some capital improvements on those facilities and would stand for any questions. And Mr. Tax Chair, I would hope that you would accept this as a friendly amendment.
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly support the A40 Kath Murdoch amendment.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Kath amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk report the next amendment.
Rukavina moving to amend House File 2337, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 348.
Call on the member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the provision that Representative Davids mentioned that I had in the bill at the request of St. Louis County. We put penalties for late property tax payments in statute at a certain number. At the time in 1998, the interest rates were 10% or around there, and we allowed, as you could see the old language, I think no less than 10 and no more than 14% for interest penalties on late property tax payments. St. Louis County support came into the tax committee. Representative David saw their charts. The tax forfeited lands could increase exponentially over the next 5 years when you start compounding interest at 10% a year. And just in St. Louis County, predicted we could have $450 million worth of tax forfeited lands going back to the county. Yesterday, the county, one of the county lobbyists called me outside and said they support this idea, and what we did instead to change it, because again we were putting numbers in statute relating to today's interest rates. So the chair suggested we tie it to a couple percentage points above the prime so it could float up and down, and that's what this amendment does, and I think the chair supports this amendment.
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Rukavina, for bringing this forward. This is very important, not just to St. Louis County, but every county in the state. We could have some situations down the road here where counties are owning a lot more land than they'd really like to. And hopefully with a lower interest rate here, people will be able to afford to pay that back and get it back on the tax rolls. Thank you, Representative Rukavina. I certainly support the 348 amendment.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Rukavina amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment is adopted. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2337.
Third reading.
As amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion to the bill. The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Please vote yes.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Paymar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'll speak for a little longer than the chair did. But, you know, not everyone watches these legislative debates, and I'm sure people don't stay up till 2:30 in the morning watching us like we did last night, so we'll see how late we go tonight. But, you know, I really believe that the public knows what's going on here, and I just want to say a little bit about my legislative district. It's not far from here. It's on the western side of St. Paul, bordering the Mississippi River, and it's a relatively middle-class district, but I also have a lot of upper-income families in my district. And like you, I have constituent meetings. I hold meetings on Saturdays and do my door knocking during the legislative campaigns. And last year, when we were debating what to do about the deficit, people in my district, regardless of income, they said to me to be smart about resolving the budget problems. They said make targeted budget cuts. They said reform government. And they said responsibly raise revenue. And they also said to compromise. Well, we didn't do much reforming last year, and we didn't raise revenue, and we certainly didn't do much compromising. But we made huge cuts. And our actions last year resulted in skyrocketing property taxes in my district, and I'm sure in most of your legislative districts. Now, the member from Farmington, about a week ago when we were discussing the school shift bill, was talking on and on about last year's election and why the GOP was in the majority. There he is, my friend from
Representative Paymar, just 1 second. Members, if you could, please. Take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that Representative Paymar can be heard on the House floor. Representative Paymar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually could hear myself for once in many speeches. Anyway, the member from Farmington was talking about the last election, and I think that we can all speculate on the last election, why the GOP has a slight majority in the Senate and in the House. But I also think it's quite interesting that the very person who ran for governor on the promise to raise revenue on the very wealthy in the state of Minnesota is our governor. So I guess we can all analyze the last election, and I guess the voters will decide in the next election what we're doing here and whether we're on the right track. I know the people in my district understand the difficult choices we have in a very difficult economy. But people I talk to, they don't think it's fair when government stacks the deck to help corporations and wealthy CEOs who make multi-million-dollar salaries, stock options, and then make the poor and the middle class pay the freight through their taxes and cuts in services. The people in my district, even those upper income folks, they understand fairness, they understand equity, they believe in shared sacrifice and helping those who, through no fault of their own...
Representative Paymar, 1 minute again, please. Members, if you could, please. Take your conversations to the alcove, please, or even better, the retiring room where the dilly bars are present so that Representative Paymar can be heard, because Representative Paymar, I can barely hear you up here. Please, members, be respectful to Representative Paymar as he is giving his speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It must be the dilly bars. Okay, so as I was saying, people in my district, even those with higher incomes, they understand that they believe in shared sacrifice and helping those who, through no fault of their own, are without a job, have a family member who has a health crisis, or a disabled child that requires costly services. People in my district, I think, will be shocked to know that the Republican Party is about to put up, I think, 72 votes on what the chair called, I think he called it the tax relief bill. I'm not sure who's getting the I do know who's getting the tax relief, actually, and this is why people in my district, I think, will be quite stunned. Because what we are doing now, we're phasing out the commercial industrial tax and on the backs of senior citizens and low-income people by cutting $70 million from the renter's credit. And we heard testimony in the tax committee about the impact of those cuts on low-income renters in the state of Minnesota. Now, the arguments have been made that we're only one of 15 states that offer this kind of credit, so let's just reduce it and give it to businesses. But that, I don't think, resonates with our constituents. Remember, people who rent also pay property taxes. And last year, the Health and Human Services budget took a $1 billion cut. Now, I don't blame the chair. I was the chair of the Public Safety Finance Committee once upon a time in this House, and I was given a very painful target to meet, and I did. It was not easy, and it was not easy for my committee. I did the best that I could, and I know the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee did the best job that he could. But I would wager, for every dollar, when we think about the rhetoric when it comes to the poor and health care, I would wager that for every dollar of identified waste and inefficiency in the Health and Human Services budget, there's $10 in real pain, real hardship, and real families. Chairs sometimes get dealt a bad hand, but the caucus and the majority is the one who deals the cards. And I think we're playing a very dangerous game for the future of our state, as was evidenced by the debate in the last night. And let me just say, as a lifelong Minnesotan, we have a history for caring for those who need a hand up, and I think that this bill slaps the middle class down. It provides property tax relief to businesses and none to homeowners. And this is not the Minnesota that I remember. This is not the Minnesota that I love. I hope you will reject this tax bill. Thank you, members, for your time.
Member from Clay. The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. Whether or not you like tax benefits for businesses and wealthy corporations, what you need to know about this is who pays for those. And members, this bill represents misplaced priorities. Misplaced priorities. And the thing about this bill is that it sends a very clear message. This bill prioritizes businesses and wealthy corporations over senior citizens and middle-class families. The tax benefits we're talking about for wealthy corporations are going to be funded by our senior citizens and our middle-class families. So how are they going to pay for that? To pay for this dollar for dollar in the first year, to pay dollar for dollar direct payment to wealthy corporations to a tax benefit is going to be paid by 312,000 Minnesotans who are senior citizens and middle-class families. Who's going to pay for this? About 90,000 senior citizens and those with disabilities, and 80% of those folks have incomes $30,000 or less. That is who is being asked to pay for those tax benefits for the wealthy corporations. So let me give you an example of how this is going to work. The average senior citizen is going to lose $103 on the average on their property tax refund. Senior citizens are going to lose $103 on the average. And members, 30% of the folks that qualify for this property tax refund are senior citizens or those with disability. And in fact, rural members, there are 14 counties where those folks who receive this property tax refund, over 50% of them are seniors or those with disability. That's in 14 counties, all in rural Minnesota. So we're asking senior citizens, 80% of those folks making $30,000 or less, to foot the bill for a tax benefit that these businesses haven't asked for. These wealthy corporations haven't asked for. So how is it going to work, members? Assume I am a business owner that is getting a tax break of $800. I am going to meet around a table at a local restaurant, and I'm going to invite 8 senior citizens, remember about an average income about $20,000, who are receiving this property tax benefit. And at this table, I'm going to have 8 senior citizens sitting around, and I'm going to say to them, you know what? I would like a tax benefit. I'm a business, I'm doing pretty good, but I want a tax benefit, and I'm going to ask each of you 8, to write me out a check for $103. That's going to cover my tax benefit. If each one of you will give me $103, I will have my tax benefit. And by the way, folks, I don't have to create a job with that $800 you're giving me. I don't have to lower the price of my goods or anything. I mean, I can do pretty much what I want. But, you know, I thought about who should pay for this. And, you know, this bill says senior citizens receiving this property tax benefit, $30,000 income or less, should foot the tab. That's what this did. And by the way, none of these corporations asked for this. None of the seasonal recreational owners asked for this. So why is it in the bill? This is misplaced priorities. This is not Minnesota nice. This is extreme. And you know, in November and February, we had some good forecast reports. And even though we have huge budget deficits into the future, this year, the second year of the biennium, we don't have a deficit this year. And as far as I know, I don't think there's additional cuts in health and human services this year or education. I'm not hearing of those. And yet, even though we don't have a deficit this year, we're going to cut somebody. And you know who we're cutting? We're cutting $70 million. We're cutting $70 million from senior citizens and middle-class families. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, and giving that money to wealthy corporations. Members, misplaced priorities. This bill puts wealthy corporations ahead of senior citizens and middle-class families. This is an easy no vote.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Knuth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And members, I hope you'll think hard about this tax bill, because I think there's always a lot in a tax bill. If you see the bill, it's thick. And I'm a new member of the tax committee this year, and I thought I'd learned a lot about the details of various policy areas, and tax committee is a whole new level. You've got property taxes and sales tax, and then you have all these TIF provisions and all these technical changes, and we go through a lot of bills that are this thick. And members, I don't want to get into the individual details of all these different provisions of this bill, because I don't think that's ultimately what this vote on this tax bill should be about. This tax bill is really about the values we hold as Minnesotans, and it's about the priorities we set as legislators for Minnesotans. And the tax committee members heard me tell this story, so I apologize to them if they're going to hear it again. But I ran for office first time, really love this state, really care about its future, and decided it was time to step up like everyone else in this chamber. And I learned a lot knocking on doors that first year. And I was out, it was a hot summer night, and I knocked on a door, modest, kind of middle class, working family home, detached garage, and I went up to the side door, and an older gentleman answered the door in about his mid-80s. And, I was 6 years younger than him, and we had obviously very different life experiences at that point. And I kind of try to feel someone out before you start jumping into what you're going to talk about or highlight. And this gentleman didn't really feel me out. He just went directly for went to a core question. He said, "So you Democrat or Republican?" And I said, "Sir, I'm a Democrat." He said, "Good." He said, "I grew up during the Depression, and it was a horrible time." He said, people didn't have food to eat, they couldn't feed their families, there were people jumping out of windows, and it was a really hard time." And he said, and President Roosevelt would get on the radio every week, and he would say, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to try to make it better. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try something else." And then he said, I'm on Social Security, and my son, he's got a disability, and he gets disability, and it's really been important for us in our life. And then he said something that really has stuck with me ever since, and he described why I'm a Democrat probably better than I've had, and he did it ever really been able to, and he did it in less than 10 words. He said, I always vote for Democrats because Democrats help me on my journey. So Democrats help me on my journey. And members, I think this legislature should think about helping Minnesotans on their journey, and this tax bill is the opposite of that. And when I say the legislature should be helping Minnesotans on their journey, I'm not saying they should be totally dependent on government assistance. I'm not saying they shouldn't work. I'm not saying that we should go broke funding these different programs. But I do think we need to prioritize the basic needs of Minnesotans and think really hard about the priorities we're setting with our state tax dollars and with our state tax policy. And members, this bill doesn't help Minnesotans on their journey. We're just just getting out of a really severe recession, and I know you've all heard from people who have been unemployed for not just weeks or months, but in some cases years, and maybe they're just getting a job, and maybe they're just getting their feet on the ground, maybe they're just starting to save a little money for their kids' tuition, college tuition, or for their retirement. Maybe they just finally got back into a rental property instead of being homeless or staying with friends, being on the edge. And what this bill is going to do for those people who may just be getting back on their feet or may have always had to struggle to keep on their feet with their disabled or senior citizens who are on a fixed income, what this bill says is we're going to take a couple $100 from you, a couple $100 that you could use to buy school supplies for your kid, or that you could use to put in the bank in case your car needs to be fixed, a couple $100 that you could really just use to help you on your journey, and a couple $100 that under current law they would have. And this bill takes that away, and it uses it to put a down payment on. I'm not going to say pay for completely, because it's not a fiscally responsible bill. It doesn't pay for itself completely in the long term. But what it uses that couple $100 from senior citizens, disabled people, people who are renters, maybe people who are a little bit on the edge, haven't been able to put together the money for a down payment for a house. It says we're going to take your $100, your $200, and we're going to put a down payment on cutting the property tax for commercial industrial property. So what does that mean? We're going to put a down payment on cutting taxes for corporations. We're going to take a couple $100 from people on the edge, people who are really struggling to make it work, and give it to corporations. That's not helping Minnesotans on their journey, members. That's not Minnesota values. When we're just turning the corner on a recession, people are just getting their feet back under them. This is the wrong priority for Minnesotans. And so, you can read through the bill and you can look at all the different provisions, but at its heart, members, this bill takes from people who might be on the edge, or takes from people who are just stepping away from the edge and maybe onto solid ground, and it cuts taxes for corporations. And then it cuts those taxes a long way into the future, and since we don't have to have these budgets balanced we don't have a balanced budget in the next biennium according to our forecast, but we don't even have to, this bill doesn't pay for it in the long term. So not only does it say, you renters, senior citizens, disabled people, people on the edge, we're going to take $100 or $200 from you, we're going to give it to these businesses and corporations to cut their property taxes. And then, 10 years out, we're going to have a few $100 million hole in our budget. So at that point, we're either going to have to come back in and raise taxes on someone, maybe you, or we're going to have to cut your programs even more. Or we're going to have to make cuts to your kid's school or to a health care program that your family might need to help take care of someone who's got a disability. We're going to cut something. Because that's the way budgets work, members. You've got $500 million in the out year, or a few $100 million in the out year. It's going to have to come from somewhere. So not only does this bill say, we're not going to help you on your journey, we're not going to keep the way the law is to make sure you have something to rely on, we're going to pull just a little bit of that rug back out from under you again, just as the economy is starting to turn around. We're going to do that, and then we're going to give it to corporations, and then in a few years we're going to come back and have to figure out how to pay for it, pay for the rest of it, because it's not paid for in the long term. So members, you can look at all the details of the tax bill, but when it comes down to it, what this bill does is takes from senior citizens, disabled people, people on the edge who might just be getting a little bit of security, takes $100 or $200 away from them, and gives it to people who don't necessarily need it, who may theoretically create a job at some point in the future. Hopefully. I hope they do, members. I really hope they do with this significant tax cut they're getting. And so, members, I ask you to vote no. You know, we don't need to be making these cuts this year. We don't have to make cuts this year. We're going to have to make some in the next biennium, but we don't have to do it this year. And to go out into our districts and look at people or listen to people who are renting and who $100 or $200 means a lot to. I couldn't look my constituents in the face and say, I went to St. Paul and served you well by voting for this bill. So, members, I ask you to vote no. This bill doesn't reflect the values of Minnesotans. It doesn't reflect the priorities of Minnesotans. And frankly, I couldn't go back to my district and honestly face my constituents and said that I was serving them well if I had voted for this bill, and I hope you'll join me in voting no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I've been here 12 years. I hope it'll be more, but so far it's been 12 years. 10 of those years, we've had budget deficits. My first year here, 2001, the economy started strong, it started good, it had been a number of good years. So we passed a tax bill. I was one of a small number that voted no, because we saw at that time that the economy was weakening and that we couldn't afford to do what the majority wanted: take on more responsibilities with no way to pay for them, make promises we couldn't keep with money we didn't have. But that's what we did. We created a deficit by design. We chose a deficit for the state of Minnesota. And by 2003, that deficit took deep roots. Did we step up? Did we take on the issues? No. We raided, we shifted, we redirected, and we cut. Unwilling to face the realities of the economy, unwilling to face the realities of the state budget, unwilling to look at what Minnesotans needed, we played games, we kicked the can down the road, and we designed the next deficit. We're doing it again, members, with House File 2337. It's deficit by design for Minnesota. Over the 12 years that I've been in this House, we've watched property taxes grow and grow and grow, forcing the middle class to shoulder more and more of the tax burden, while at the same time they see less opportunities for their children in schools, they see less road maintenance, they see less government services that they need and rely on, less services in their parks, fewer cops, fewer firefighters, less of what they need, and more of the tax burden. All because we're unwilling to step back from a strategy of deficit by design. So what do we do in this bill? We choose corporate Minnesota over the middle class, corporate Minnesota over the low income, the elderly, and the disabled. Apparently, the greatest generation has never given enough, because now we're asking them to give so that we can fund speculative investments on the parts of wealthy investors. And after we've taken the money from the poor, from the elderly and the disabled, and given it to those speculative investors, those wealthy investors, we interfere with where they invest their money. We tell them where they should invest instead of letting the market decide where the best business opportunities are. These corporate tax cuts and subsidies will create an even deeper deficit in the future than the one that is projected now. We're like a family living paycheck to paycheck with college costs on the horizon who decides we need a new car. We don't know how we're going to pay for it, but we're going to go out and take out that loan, and figure out how to pay for it later. Members, it's not fiscally responsible. It's not the right thing to do. It doesn't build Minnesota. It doesn't build the business climate. And that maybe is the most ironic part, is in a bill that's purported to build the business climate for Minnesotans, we failed. What does business want? More of the grandstanding, the stalemate and political games that marked the last legislative session? More locked capitals where public policy decisions are made in private, behind closed doors, in a Capitol building where the public can't watch the public's business being done, and where even members of the majority don't know what's in the bills? No. What the business community wants is stability, because it's only then that we stay out of their business. They want to know that the roads are going to be plowed, the bridges are going to be taken care of. They want to know the court system is there for them to resolve conflicts. They want to know that the education system is strong and robust and growing so that they get the workforce that they need and want and that's ready for the 21st century. They want to know that Minnesota is open for business, functioning and responsible, not the direction of deficit by design that this bill takes us. Members, there's other choices than this. We can vote no. We can ask the tax committee to be fiscally responsible, to step up to its responsibilities, to build Minnesota in a way that strengthens the state, business and middle class, employee and employer, and sets Minnesota on a positive direction. I ask for your no vote. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I want to compliment Representative Paymar, Representative Marquardt, Representative Knuth, and Representative Davney for beginning this discussion and pointing out the horrendous problems that are inherent in this bill. In fact, this bill, when you talk about tax policy, is so poor that it's really hard to know where to begin. But I want to talk first a little bit about transparency. We're well within the legislative session, and we really don't know what the overall budget is for the Minnesota House. But yet we're passing major finance and tax bills. And I've asked that question in the various committees I'm on. What are your targets? Asked in capital investment today. And that's really something that hasn't been shared. So there's a total lack of transparency, inability for the public to weigh in and understand exactly what these policies are and what they're going to do long term to the state of Minnesota on a fiscal basis. I want to talk a little bit about responsibility. There's a lack of transparency, but there's a lack of responsibility when you bring a bill like this before us. And just to remind you, under current law, we were to refill the reserve, then we were to refill the cash flow account, and then we were to begin to pay back the school districts. So some people on the other side of the aisle like to talk about a surplus. Well, there is no surplus, members. The bottom line, as provided us by MMB, the very first page shows a zero, an absolute zero. But when we talk about the next biennium, and that's where I want to go when I talk about responsibility, just a few things to keep in mind. The forecast, the February forecast shows, as we open the session next year, a $1.1 billion shortfall. We will still owe the schools $2.2 billion, bringing us to a total deficit, if we were to meet our responsibilities, to $3.5 billion. Now, this bill that is before us adds in 14 and 15 an additional $228 million to the deficit. If you project it out to 16 and 17, that grows to a biennial number of 560 million. And if you go out to 18 and 19, it becomes 877 million. And it goes on and on and on. And so we're talking about multi-billions of dollars by the time this bill is fully implemented. If I recall correctly, I think it's about $6 billion in total or something like that, maybe even more. So, members, this is not a bill that is transparent in terms of the overall budget. This is not a bill that deals with any fiscal responsibility. And on that side of the aisle, I know that that's what some of you thought you were running on. And, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out a couple of other things about where we stand. You know, when we talk about our obligations out over the next few years, those tobacco bonds that were issued, appropriation bonds, they were issued at $750 million. So when you talk about some sort of fiscal responsibility and some sort of a surplus, keep in mind that we have $750 million to pay back over the next 20 years, and that's the principle. If you add the interest in there, it grows to $1.1 billion. So you're really kicking the can down the road, and you're not dealing with fiscal responsibility, and you're leaving the next legislative session and many after with the same issues that Representative Davney pointed out. He said he'd been here 12 years, and 10 of those years we were having fiscal difficulties and running deficits. And we're just going to continue on that same road. So members, vote no. This is not a responsible bill to even bring forward. Thank you.
The member from Martin, Representative Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill is a very good bill. The Tax Relief and Job Creation Act will make Minnesota a more economically competitive and attractive place to start jobs. The bill is focused on Minnesota businesses and employment growth, which will stimulate long-term economic activity. It encourages businesses to stay here, expand here, to move their operations here, and create more jobs. This act declares to job creators around the country that Minnesota is open for business. Minnesota business property tax ranks amongst the highest in the nation, where middle class property taxes for homes are average in the country. We need to make our state more competitive to foster business development, expansions, and job growth. The plan would phase out a statewide tax on business property all over 12 years beginning 2014. If we want to compete with states like Texas, it's got 40% of the total jobs in the United States in the last couple of years, we have to do things like this. If we don't, we will shrink from having the ninth best economy to the 13th, and we're going lower. So if you want to see our economy continue to go spiral downhill, punish our employers. Punish those people that create the jobs, the 3Ms, the General Mills. It would be just like Ford. They'll leave us. We want long-term relationships with businesses that will hire people, that will expand here, will create higher paying jobs. We can't do that by having one of the highest business property taxes in the nation, while the rest of us are average. We aren't high for homes, we're average. But we are high for commercial industrial. So let's help the businesses grow. In the mid-90s, we grew so much we had surpluses every year. I would love to see that happen again, only I hope we're smart enough to put some of it in the bank. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Itasca, Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, in the time that I've been here, you've heard me talk about northern Minnesota, northern rural Minnesota, our beautiful parks, the Superior and Chippewa National Forests, county tax forfeit, PILT, CON-CON, and various and assorted other large tracts of public land that we all enjoy, that you enjoy, that we welcome you to come and visit. But unfortunately, those local units of government, those elected school board members, those elected city council persons, county boards, town boards, because of that beautiful public land, our tax base is woefully poor. The problem in rural northern Minnesota is not an unwillingness to provide services to the poor and the disadvantaged and the middle class and in fact the upper class. But we don't have a tax capacity that can sustain our entrepreneurial, commercial, industrial base and our homestead property tax base. It just doesn't work. Property taxes do not work in northern Minnesota. It's a tax capacity problem. Now I know, and you know, in particular those of us who represent more rural districts, we know that property taxes are rising in our communities. But let me tell you, property taxes in northern Minnesota, northern rural Minnesota, are exceeding the statewide average increase in property taxes by over 30%. And that's not right. A third grader who attends third grade in the Grand Rapids School District is entitled to the same opportunity for class size, the same opportunity for extracurricular activities, the same opportunity for special education, the same opportunity for transportation as students in Glencoe or any other community whose name starts with a G. And that's not right. And we've had chances, many chances to correct what I see as a growing serious problem in northern rural Minnesota, where homestead property taxes are on the verge of becoming confiscatory. Yes, that's right. Confiscatory. People unable to make those property tax payments, on top of mortgage foreclosures, driving people, and in particular, young families with children, out of northern Minnesota. Shameful. We've had opportunities to raise revenue in a progressive manner. We've had opportunities to institute fourth tiers. We've had opportunities to follow Governor Dayton's courageous stance on raising revenue on those who can afford to pay more. And we said no. Instead, we'll go home shortly and we'll have to answer to our homeowners.
We'll have to have answers to the question, why are my property taxes becoming confiscatory? Why is it renters' property taxes are rising at exorbitant rates, causing higher rental levels of payments? Well, you know the answer. We didn't have the courage to progressively raise revenue and to ask those great corporate citizens that you talk about so much to pay just a little bit more. Please vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's unfair to have modest income people fund the people who rent, our seniors and people with disabilities, to fund corporate tax breaks. But they don't fund it fully. They just put the $70 million down payment on what will ultimately become an $800 million a year burden when we're projected to have a deficit going into the future. And dropping the household income from $53,000 to $20,000 of household income, $20,000, is going to be devastating to many households. We heard testimony that this is the money that people get in the fall for their school supplies. This is what seniors use for those expensive medical co-pays and deductibles and their health insurance. It isn't all free when you're on Medicare. You learn that pretty darn quick. And it's what keeps many families that have to go into debt to pay for that car repair on the old jalopy that they got in the garage. It allows them to finally get that credit card a little bit more under control. But it's not good for our economy either. And I'm having passed out a letter that I did not solicit from a small business owner in Hennepin County, a suburban Hennepin County small business owner. And this shows why it's not good for our economy. This woman is the bookkeeper for a business that her husband owns, the kind of business that many of you have described wanting to help. And her daughter participated with her faith community in an exercise sponsored by Lutheran Social Services, in which they tried to put together a budget for a modest working family earning about $3,000 a month, the kind of family that's going to have its renter's credit devastated by this particular bill. Not a single group of adults and children from the Minnetonka area and Plymouth area was able to make that budget balance in 1 month. She says she was really surprised because her income isn't at that level.
Excuse me, Representative Loeffler. Could we have some quiet in the chambers, please? Take your conversations to the back room, please. Thank you. Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here we have this Minnetonka group of adults and kids trying to figure out how to make a modest income work for a working family, and they couldn't make it work, participating in a faith exercise. But this woman says, my husband owns a business and they purchased property in a building in Hennepin County in 2011. As their accountant, I can assure the tax committee that any decrease in property tax will have absolutely no bearing on future hiring. We do plan to hire based on increased sales. If our property taxes go down as a business, it will be money in our pocket. Most likely a renter will spend a tax credit in the community on necessities they might otherwise not be able to afford. If our business sees a commercial property tax credit, it will flow to our family as income and go into savings where there is no boost to the local economy. We all know people who are struggling with this economy. We know the key to making our economy re-energized, and that is consumer spending and consumer confidence. Not helping people put more money into savings accounts. There's no economic spin-off by cutting the renter's credit, which will go immediately into the grocery store, the drug store, and the school supplies for our families. Almost all of us have heard from property owners who were upset about property tax increases last year. Who had the biggest property tax increases? You might be surprised it was the renters. They pay it through their rent. Statewide, the property taxes went up 7% on apartments, and if you represent Greater Minnesota, it was 9.5%. 9.5%, greater than anything except a few types of ag property. So the biggest property tax increases that, as a result of the elimination of the market valued homestead credit, was on rental properties. You know who got the even bigger increase? The low-income apartments. They went up over 10% a year. So how do we help say, gee, that's a problem? We take away the renter's credit. But our businesses, the big beneficiary of this bill, what happened to them? Statewide, all businesses, it was up 6%. But how about those big businesses, the big corporations, the ones with the shiny corporate headquarters and the big towers in downtown Minneapolis? Theirs went up 3.4% statewide, less than half of what homeowners and renters experienced. But the priority here is not to address the property tax increases of the people who live in our communities. It's to benefit those whose taxes only went up 3.4%. This will make our deficits work, as Representative Carlson explained. That it makes promises that we cannot fund in the future. But worse yet, it breaks our promises to our current constituents. And I think you should know this, because all of us are going to be going door to door, at least those who aren't retiring, come August and September, right about the time people get these refund checks. And you ought to be prepared as you're going door to door to explain to someone why the check that they're getting is less than what they applied for when they filled out their tax forms in January. And the biggest explanation that's going to be hard to explain is those of you who represent suburban communities. Because suburban residents are going to lose, on average, $275. And if you're a family who uses this for the back-to-school clothes and supplies and the athletic fees so your kids can start off the school year with like all the other kids in your community, that family is counting on that extra $275, and it's not going to be there. Now, I have to say to Chairman Davids, he did do an honorable thing that we haven't seen in the past. He's actually funded $29,000 to the Department of Revenue to recalculate this and to print a statement that will go out with a check that says, sorry, your check isn't what you applied for because of the actions of the 2012 legislature. So they're going to get their check less than what they applied for, and it's going to say, we're the reason. So you ought to make sure that you pay attention to this, because every door that you go to that's a renter, you're going to have to potentially explain this fall why they didn't get what they did. So I'm not willing to step up to break our promises, invest our money in things that don't benefit our economy, and help the people who and hurt the people who are most struggling day to day, paycheck to paycheck to make it. But the beneficiaries have not been talked about yet. There's a laundry list of business tax breaks and corporate tax breaks that are in this bill. But the one that's, I think, the scariest precedent, and it's got a really cute name, and the name is not transparent. It is the Technology Corporate Franchise Tax Certificate Transfer Program. And I don't think anyone ever could explain what that is. The Technology Corporate Franchise Tax Certificate Transfer Program. But you know what it is? It's if you're an unprofitable company in a couple of little areas and you got all these losses and you don't know what to, they're never going to be able to do anything with all those losses. You've had all your investors invest in you, and despite your best efforts, your business just hasn't made it. You're going to get to sell those losses to successful corporations to reduce their profits. So now, for the first time ever in our tax policy, we're going to let losing businesses sell their losses in order that wealthy, successful corporations can avoid paying their fair share. And I think that's a terrible precedent, no matter who paid for this bill, and I think we all are going to be held accountable this fall. I urge a no vote.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just talked to Representative Paymar, and he didn't like my Geraldo Rivera story from last night. But I know a lot of you other did. You loved it. And Representative Downey was offended because he thought I compared Geraldo Rivera to Mary Kiffmeyer. And I want to set the record straight. Representative Kiffmeyer is much better looking than Geraldo Rivera, and always will be. So Representative Kiffmeyer is not here. But I'll use a different analogy today. And it's Napoleon Dynamite. I know the tax chair loves Napoleon Dynamite. And when we were going through this bill in committee, I was thinking about a scene from Napoleon Dynamite. I don't know how many of you have seen that movie, but most of you remember Pedro. Vote for Pedro. Vote for Pedro. And I think I remember Congresswoman Bachmann, when she was in the Senate, showed up one day with a Vote for Pedro shirt on under one of her yellow jackets. So she knew what Vote for Pedro meant. A lot of the people around here do too. But one of my favorite scenes from that movie is when Napoleon Dynamite is sitting in the bleachers with Pedro. And they're talking about who they're going to invite to the school dance, who they're going to invite to prom. And they're sitting in the bleachers, and Napoleon shows Pedro a picture of a woman that came out of a wallet. It's a fake picture. He's like, yeah, that's my girlfriend. Probably going to fly her out here, but she's busy on a model shoot, so she might not be able to come. And he says to Pedro, who are you going to invite to prom? And Pedro says, I don't know. Probably that girl right there. And he points to the girl out on the track. And it was one of the popular girls at the school. And Napoleon says, Summer Wheatley? How are you going to do that? And Pedro says, I don't know. Probably build her a cake or something. And sure enough, he builds her a cake. And he tiptoes up to Summer Wheatley's door, and he sets the cake down, and he tiptoes away. And they show a camera shot of the top of the cake, and in icing it says, Pedro Hart Summer. And he gives her the cake. Well, a couple scenes later, they show Summer Wheatley come up to Napoleon Dynamite on the playground and say, is Pedro here today? And Napoleon says, no. And Summer Wheatley says, well, can you give this note to him? And hands Napoleon a note. And he says, sure. And he opens up the note, and the note says, no, in big letters with little hearts underneath the exclamation points for the points. And, Napoleon, of course, was disappointed for his friend. But Pedro just bounced back, and he asked someone else to the prom and ended up getting a date. But I thought about this when I saw yet another effort by you guys in the GOP to give corporations tax breaks. These corporations in Minnesota, as has been stated, they haven't asked for these tax breaks. They don't even need these tax breaks. And like the popular girls at Napoleon Dynamite's high school, they're laughing at you. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Because again and again, year after year, you come forward to give something they don't need, and they're creating their jobs on their own. And if they are, they're making money on their own. They're paying less and less taxes. And just to be considered the friends of some of the popular kids, you think you got to continue to offer them tax breaks that they haven't asked for and they don't need. And they don't even show up at tax committee to ask for these. They send people in with the business partnership or the Chamber of Commerce, say, yep, we're pretty sure these will create jobs. And I know that the tax cuts they got 10 years ago that have been ongoing costs of $600 million to $1 billion haven't created jobs. In fact, Governor Pawlenty was constantly complaining about us bleeding manufacturing jobs in the face of these overwhelming tax cuts. But never mind, we're pretty sure this next round, this will create some jobs. So how are you going to do it? How are you going to offer Summer Wheatley another cake in the hopes that she'll go to the prom with you? Well, you're going to rob renters. $70 million a year. You rob the renters. You rob seniors. You rob low-income people. And it's wrong. Not only is it wrong, but they're still laughing at you because they're getting lower and lower taxes. And I passed out this sheet on the floor. This was from February. With the tax break, corporate rate is lowest in decades. Now, this is the federal tax rate, but I couldn't believe when I read this. It's telling you that with a combined top state and federal tax rate of 39.2%, it says the United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, which is what I hear from a lot of you over there in the GOP a lot too, that we've got one of the highest tax rates in the United States. And Minnesota has one of the highest tax rates in the United States. I honestly don't know why there are any companies here at all. I mean, they should be making a beeline for the borders, and for some reason they stick around. And I can't figure out why. And then I read more of the article, and I realize, oh, it's because they don't pay that. They don't pay 39.2%. They pay about 8%. 8% of their income they pay in tax. And I think, wow, what would it be like if I got to pay 8% of my income in taxes? How cool would that be? But this is because of an infusion in cash at the federal level this year. So it's down from a 15% total in 2007. 15%. The infamous Mitt Romney 15%. I don't know what I pay in taxes, about 15%. And I wonder what it'd be like, what I'd be able to do if I paid a tax rate of 15%. Now, I read that part of the article and I thought, this is funny. I remember this being a little bit different. Why in the second paragraph of that Wall Street Journal article, it must be the liberal media, you know, Wall Street Journal, the bastion of the liberal media. The second paragraph says that total corporate federal taxes fell 12.1%. Wait a second, I thought it was 8%. And that was from previous totals of 25.6%. And then I read the fine print in that paragraph, and that was because it was U.S. totals from activities in the U.S. So that means when they're sending all our jobs overseas, where they're sending jobs that the middle class should have to Bangalore, India, to the Philippines. I went to some call centers in the Philippines in 2008. It was incredible. All these jobs that were American jobs for American corporations going to the Philippines. Jobs in China. With our tax breaks that U.S. taxpayers are giving them, they're creating jobs outside of the United States. And with that, their tax rate falls from 12% to 8%, saving themselves another 30% off the top of that. And in other years, that's the same thing as well. And I remembered when I thought about this that that's the combined rate, but 25%, according to that article, and as is stated by a GAO study in 2008, that most corporations pay no U.S. income tax at all. I really appreciate Representative Downey's article he passed out recognizing corporations. There's a handful on the sheet here that have done a great job of giving at least 2% of their pre-tax earnings for charitable and community involvement, which is great. 2% is great. God, if I was paying 8%, I think I could probably muster a little bit more than 2%. But it's fantastic. It's nice that these corporations can endow some foundations. But when they throw you crumbs, you can actually look at the numbers. You start to wonder what's actually happening, and they send people up here. Again, I haven't seen Target up here in the tax committee asking for an additional tax break. I haven't seen Best Buy up here asking for an additional tax break. But I have heard people saying, no, we're going to create jobs out of this. And I thought they must think we are fools. Because for over 10 years, we've been operating on $600 million to $1 billion worth of giveaways, and ironically, our deficits have roughly followed that same trajectory. Over those 10 years, we have bled manufacturing jobs. Our economy is in shambles. Now, I could make the argument that the only incentive for Minnesota corporations to create jobs is to have a high tax rate, because then they can write it off when they actually create a job, when they're accountable for creating a job. And in fact, the governor's plan would say that if you hire someone and can show that you only hired them for a year, that you get a tax break. And that wasn't going to take anything out of the bill additionally. The bill was going to stay as is, but we're offering additional money for corporations if they hired a soldier, someone straight out of college, or someone who was unemployed, and employed them, big an additional $3,000 tax break, but it was rejected on a party line vote. And I thought, there can be absolutely no reason for that at all. And there's no reason. You had the opportunity, but it was because it was the governor's tax plan. And let me tell you, members, thank God you've got Governor Dayton here to save you from yourselves. Because if we get another one of these bills going through, another one of these tax bills, you're going to burn the house down. You're burning Minnesota down. We have to reinvest in what we cherished as a state, and what, when we grew up here in this United States, we had decent public schools, we had decent roads. We knew that if we were a renter, we at least got a fair shake in how much taxes we were paying because we got a renter's credit, and now that's being taken away as well. And I wonder, when you look at the whole gamut of all the different pots that you could take in order to give corporations more money that they didn't ask for, just in the hopes that they'll think you're their friend, the pot that you picked was the renters, was students, was the elderly, was the people who couldn't afford to give corporations any more money that they don't need. And Representative Downey, I wonder how these corporations that give 2%, how much of that money is going to go to take care of the renters who are going to go without their medication, without their car repair, without their opportunity to get to work. And they're not accountable for that, because they're not accountable to voters. They're accountable to one group, and that's the shareholders. The shareholders are there designed to boost the budget. So members, if we do this one more time, I can only hope, and I believe, that Governor Dayton will be there with his veto pen to save you from yourselves. Because but for that, you will see a very different Minnesota than the one that we grew up in.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, particularly members on the other side of the aisle. I think we have to be educated on one fundamental truth. And I'm going to use special English here. I'll speak slow and loud. Members, businesses are not people. Corporations are not people. Now, the reason why this is important to understand, folks, is because the only ones who pay taxes, the only ones who can logically pay taxes are people. So now that we got that straight, we are not advocating raising taxes on things. The other side of the aisle is advocating raising taxes on people. And if you bother reading any study on the effects of increasing taxes on things, i.e. corporations or businesses, you would read study after study after study that says it's one of the most regressive taxes we can impose. Because these business taxes, which are taxes on people, get passed down through the chain in the business. And who ends up paying them? It's the people who purchase the product and or the service. And if it isn't those folks, then it is the people whose labor produces the product or the service. So we sit here and we make up this imaginary monster called corporation. And we're going to tax corporation. Well, I've never seen corporation write out a check. I've never seen corporation actually walk into the Department of Revenue and say, oh, here's a big square building coming on over. It's ridiculous. And the people of the state of Minnesota get that. So let's stop the rhetoric. You believe some people have more than you feel they deserve, then just say it. But let's stop this. We need to be taxing corporations. We need to be taxing businesses. Because when we raise taxes on corporations, when we raise taxes on services, we're actually raising the price of the product. Raise the price of the product. Who's it hurt more? The person making a lot of money or the person making a little bit of money? It hurts the person making a little bit of money a whole lot more. And yet we got one side of the aisle that claims they're for the little guy. It's illogical. It's illogical. And the people of the state of Minnesota are seeing through it. Business taxes not only hurt the worker and the consumer directly through lower wages and higher prices, but you keep doing this, and it's going to hurt the worker dramatically by not only lowering their wages, but by eliminating their wages. 45th in the nation in business tax climate. You don't think businessmen look at stuff like this when they look at expanding, when they look at growing, when they look at relocating? They look at things like this because they're people too. They're people too. Members, let's have the debate. Let's have the debate on philosophy. Let's have the debate on principle, but let's not have the debate on fairy tales. And the fairy tale that a corporation actually pays a tax is something that the Grimm's brothers would be proud of producing.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I just have to respond to some of the comments that have been made on the other side of the aisle. And you know, I don't think I'm very different than you. When I grew up, and my parents and my grandparents were instilling these Minnesota values in me, you know, we learned the same things. You should be honest. You should take responsibility. You should get a good education, work hard, take care of your family, love your neighbor, give back to your community. I think these are the values that we all share. And one of the things my parents also taught me was to say please and to say thank you. And I think I've been down here 4 years, and I'm not sure that I have ever heard the words thank you come out of the mouths of the other side in a floor debate for the job providers and the people who are doing so many good things in this community. And we've heard a litany of comments here over the last couple of weeks in committee and on the floor and in the amendments, and loopholes and tax havens and tax dodgers and schemes and all of these things, right, members? So I rise today to say thank you to every business in Minnesota, every businessman and woman who has taken a risk and hung out a shingle and hired an employee. And I'm going to tell them thank you for the $13 billion that you provided to our K-12 system in this biennium. And I'm going to tell them thank you for the $10 billion that we put into our Health and Human Services system. And we can go all the way down the list of our fiscal committees members. And I think we should say thank you. Instead of tearing them up and tearing them down and insulting them and demonizing them, how about we just say thank you? Members, the alternative to the approach that Chair Davids has laid out here in the course that the majority has taken is really an unbelievably stark contrast. Governor Dayton proposed a $3 billion tax increase with an over $1 billion education shift, left only $171 million in the reserves, even though he was raising all those taxes that would solve all of our problems. Balanced the budget, yeah, but with a huge tax increase, didn't leave us very fiscally stable. And actually, if you go back and look at the spreadsheets, I took the time to do that, out in the next biennium, guess what Governor Dayton had to do again? Another big tax increase, virtually no pay down on the shift, big old tax increase. I'm looking at it, looks to me like it's at least 2.3, maybe over $3 billion in tax increases. And do you know what that 2014-15 budget left in the reserves? Zero, nothing. Another $2 to $3 billion tax increase. That's over $5 billion in tax increases that he proposed to leave absolutely zero in our reserves. And guess what? A $1 billion deficit. Members, we can come down here and we can bash our job providers. We can bash all the people who are just doing the same thing good Minnesotans have always done for these many decades and centuries. And we can try and raise taxes on them, but you know what? It doesn't work. And so we got an alternative. We got the Republican fiscal sanity that we brought to the budget process last year. We've got another proposal here to improve the job climate. And Representative Lencheski, I know you're chomping at the bit to get at your spreadsheet here. But members, this is the best spreadsheet I have ever voted on in my career down here at the legislature. We are actually cutting taxes. By the time this is all in place, we're cutting taxes by $1 billion a year. And guess what, members? That's a regressive tax increase. Do you know who this money goes to when we cut these taxes? The people at the lowest end of the income continuum. This is a tax cut for the lowest income Minnesotans. And you know what? We sit down here and we hear about how much you care about the poor because you're willing to raise taxes on the rich guy. You know what? I challenge people and the governor and tax committee, why don't you cut taxes on the lower income people, huh? If you really want to make it fair, why don't you cut the lower end income taxes? Why don't you cut other regressive taxes? But you never do it, and we are. We are cutting one of the most regressive taxes there is. Our tax incidence study is going to be better by virtue of this tax cut. It will. Anybody on tax committee can tell you that. And what have the Democrats brought us? Well, we increased a regressive tax, the state sales tax. We increased another regressive tax, the Hennepin County sales tax, to fund a stadium. Added taxes to cigarettes, increased the gas tax, increased the tax on tab fees because you care about the poor so much. Well, how about reducing the burden on them? How about cutting their taxes? That is what this bill does. Members, these businesses that we've been demonizing these last few weeks are the very people that are giving literally $682 million a year in charitable contributions. That isn't to say all the events that they sponsor and staff and all the runs you go on and the cancer fundraisers and stuff that they lead. And you know what? No one had to pass a law to ask them to give 2 to 4% to 5% of their income to these charities. Did anybody down here pass a law to do that? I've never seen it since I've been here in 4 years. Who passed the law that told these people? We got to make them pay their fair share, right? We passed the law. The reality is everything you do is to raise taxes and spend more down here, and it's time for it to stop, and we got a great bill that does that. So I'm going to end where I started. I'm going to say thanks to these businesses that were so easy and quick to bash. The ones that are providing the jobs, paying the wages, providing health care benefits, life insurance benefits, paying state unemployment, federal unemployment, workers' comp, providing credits for college tuition so people can advance in their degrees, doing the mentoring, the training, putting them through their continuing professional education for 2 weeks every year, mentoring them, grooming them so that they might be able to take over that business and actually provide for another group of employees to come up through the ranks, doing the good stuff that Minnesotans have always done. They don't need to apologize, and I'm telling you, we need to say thank you. Thank you, Minnesotans.
A member from Hennepin, Representative Lencheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will Representative Masrol yield?
Representative Masrol is not on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Dean yield?
You said Representative Dean? Representative Dean will yield. Representative Lencheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, Can you tell me, do you have folks in your district who reside there who don't own their own home?
Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Lincheski, yes.
Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Dean will further yield, Mr. Speaker, Representative Dean, are you comfortable asking the folks who do not own their own home but reside in your district and earn less than $55,000 a year to pay for tax cuts for, say, Toys R Us?
Representative Dean will yield. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lincheski, I would love to tell you about the hardworking people in my district. In about 2006, their homes were probably worth 40% more than they are now. Some of those people you would call rich. Some other people wouldn't. Maybe one person's working, the other person's out of a job. Maybe they don't get much help. Maybe they don't qualify for any help. Maybe one person's out of a job now. But you know what, Representative Lincheski? Their house payment's still the same. It didn't go down. It didn't go down 50%, maybe like the cost of their house, 30%, 40%, 50%. Their mortgage is still the same. They got the same number of kids, Representative Lincheski. They got the same number of teeth in those little kids' mouths. They got braces on them. They got orthodontist bills. And they're paying those bills every month. Those didn't go down, Representative Lincheski. But you know what did? The price of their house. You know what else did? Their income, their bottom line income. Some of those people, Representative Lincheski, some of those people hurting really hard in my district, some of them people are the people you dislike the most, the people you go after the most, the people who have the audacity to own a business, to sign the front of a paycheck, to risk. You know what, Representative Lincheski? You know what somebody told me when I started a business? They said, pay yourself first. You know what you pay first, Representative Lincheski, when you own a business? You don't pay yourself first. You pay your employees first. You pay their kids' health care insurance first, Representative Lincheski. That's what you pay first. And some months, you never get paid at all. You never get paid at all when you stick out your neck and you pay those bills and you show up for work every day, Representative Lincheski. Yes, I would love to talk to you a lot about the people in my district, because the people in my district are hurting just as much as anybody else around the state of Minnesota. Don't pretend they're not.
Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, I hear your passion there. I asked you about your renters. I didn't hear you comment on that. And if you thought they should pay for a tax break for businesses, but you know, Representative Dean, I listen closely, and it's always interesting to me to watch people sort of harangue me on tax policy, and I understand that's how it works. And Representative Dean, I think you know that I actually represent a lot more business owners than you and a lot more wealthy people than you. So I think I understand how that works. And if anybody doubts that, just take a visit to Representative Dean's district and mine, and we can talk about that. But I wasn't asking about that. I wasn't asking about that. But before, Mr. Speaker, you know, maybe someone can answer about that. You know, the anger, I guess, about, you know, these poor homeowners. Agreed. In fact, members, just recall last year, the majority took away all the homeowners' homestead credit. So that's not what you're doing this year. Last year, the chair and all of the majority voted to take homeowners' homestead credit away from them forever. And this year, they're going to take it from the renters. So I wasn't asking about last year's bill, but we can go into that if we want to. Mr. Speaker, will Representative Holberg yield?
She will yield. Representative Holberg. Representative Lincheski, ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Holberg, I don't know if you've had time, but I know I passed this same spreadsheet out to you that Representative Downey was just talking about how excited he was about it and how great he thought it was. and I passed it out in Ways and Means. And members, I hope you take a look at it. If you look at the tax spreadsheet, members, there's only one committee in the Minnesota legislature, in the House and Senate, that is in charge of the revenue, funds all the other finance committees, and it's even more powerful in the House than in the Senate because revenue has to come from the House, not the Senate. So the tax committee is very powerful, and Madam Chair, you know that without the tax bill, you can't fund your finance bills. So, members, if you look at this spreadsheet, you can see what this bill is doing. We, by law, thankfully have that we're going to look at the first biennium and what happens in the second biennium. But if you look at what this bill is doing, you know, we're building in a new deficit of $900 million a year, every year, for all time, for some other legislature to solve that problem. You can see that on the spreadsheet. But members, that isn't the whole story. The spreadsheet only goes out to 18 and 19. The bill continues to create a deficit till 2026. And so, Representative Holberg, I know there's no budget resolution, so every bill that comes before you doesn't have to balance, and this is sort of Exhibit A. There's a built-in deficit for somebody else to solve later, and I think, you know, folks always like to say, well, that means someone's going to raise taxes. No, that's not what I'm going to ask. Representative Holberg, do you know what your caucus, if they're still in the majority throughout these years as we track through these deficits, because I don't think you will raise taxes. We've watched that, but I also notice you're not willing to cut. So last year's government shutdown solution had shifts and gimmicks and one-time movement, and in fact, if you go back and look, and Representative Holberg, I think, can tell you that when the majority was the party opposite, we actually made significantly bigger cuts. So Representative Holberg, can you tell us what you're going to cut, or ask all the chairs who work under you are going to cut to come up with $800 million a year?
Member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lonchewski. That's really speculative as far as what I would ask future chairs to cut. I don't, and I guess I would at least like to respond that we didn't cut anything. We balanced a budget in the last biennium, in last year, in which the bills all left the House floor without the shift and without the tobacco bonds. The person that couldn't cut around here was the governor. And after weeks and weeks and weeks of him saying that he would meet us halfway and never even seeing a spreadsheet to show us where his halfway reductions would be taken, eventually we ended up with a solution which the governor supported. We voted for to end the shutdown. I don't think anybody had that on their top of this would make me really happy to resolve the budget list. But the bills that left the House floor prior to negotiation with the governor did not have those components that you referenced.
Representative Lonchewski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Holberg. And you did cut some. Certainly the percentage of cuts to solve the deficit didn't come close to raising property tax by taking away people's homestead credit and doing the school shift and the selling of the tobacco bonds. There were some cuts in there, but for folks who think you can just cut your way out of problems, neither side has done such a great job on that. But Mr. Chair, I was actually hoping to see Representative Mazerall still. I did have that question for him, but because he has a bill in here that I wanted to ask him about. But Mr. Speaker, will Representative Drazkowski yield?
Representative Drazkowski, he will yield. Representative Lonchewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Drazkowski. I was trying to ask people where your district was, and I know you have Representative Svigum's old district, and I'm not really sure, but I think when I go to Rochester, I see this is a tax-free zone sign, or the Job Z, I think it is. Is it your district in Kenyon that has the signs up that move a business here and you don't have to pay taxes?
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lonchewski. I believe Kenyon is one of the cities that is a Job Z city. Zumbrota has used Job Z, and there may be others.
Representative Lanczewski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Drazkowski, you know, I think you have Zumbrota Falls in your district, and I used to canoe there with my dad as a kid, and you have a lot of nice trout streams and that area. So, I've spent some time in your area, and now I just drive through it, you know, so I'm not a kid anymore. But Representative Drazkowski, I've watched you on the tax committee. This has been your first biennium on the tax committee, and I think you have a strong sense of conviction and often are willing to break ranks on your principles. And so, Representative Drazkowski, I just want to ask you, having gone through your community and seen that you do have some rental, do you think it's okay for the folks who earn under $55,000 a year, who reside in your community, not the state, your community, who are renters, to pay for a tax cut for, say, all the BP gas stations or Home Depot?
The member from Wabasha will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Lanczewski, let me tell you about the people in my district. The people in my district are people who survived the flood of 2010, and it was Umbro Falls that got hit the hardest. A town of 200 people. They got up off of they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. They relocated half of their town. Some people had nothing to their name at that point, but they are the happiest people in Minnesota right now because they have pulled through that, weathered the storm, recovered, and what they want, Representative Lanczewski, is a job.
Representative Lanczewski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Drazkowski, again, I was asking about the renters, and you talked about your homeowners, and Representative Drazkowski, I understand the passion there too, but you voted to take away their homestead credit. And in fact, you know that Representative Marquardt and I carried bills through the process for those same constituents of yours to give them tax relief during those crises. But I was asking, do you think it's fair that the people who live in your district who are renters, who earn under $55,000 a year, should pay for a tax cut for, say, Perkins Restaurants or Lutzen?
You're asking him to yield? He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought I communicated, Representative Lanczewski, but the people in my district would prefer to have a job over government handouts. And Representative Lanczewski, the renter's tax credit is a subsidy. Let's call it what it is. It's not a tax credit. The people who rent do not pay property taxes. Let's frame that properly. But the people in my district would prefer to have a job and earn the money on their own rather than becoming dependent on the government like your people on your side of the aisle want to continue to purvey to us and the rest of Minnesota. The people in my district reject that notion. They want a job, Representative Lanczewski, and then they want government to get out of their way.
Representative Lanczewski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I have a lot more questions for the author of the bill and for Representative Mazerow, so I'll wait till the debate has continued. But members, there are no jobs in this bill. I mean, if you think that's the reason to vote for this bill, there's no jobs in this bill. And Representative Biskins, if you want to walk over to my desk, I'll show you the tax incidence of the business tax, and I'll show you the tax incidence of the renters and the homeowners. And first place of those three is businesses in current law. So if you're worried about who's paying the regressive tax, I got it right here. It's page 38 of the Minnesota Tax Incidence Report. And so folks can just be comfortable, I guess, with knowing that homeowners in current law pay higher and more regressive taxes, as do renters, than businesses. So, that's just factual. I don't think anybody would refute that. But what we're doing in this bill is we're going to ask people who earn under $55,000 a year to give tax cuts to those who are very well situated. Remember, some of the provisions in the bill that supposedly create jobs but actually don't, they pick winners and losers and tax preferences. What they do is say you only qualify if you earn $300,000. So if anybody here thinks that's not what's happening in the bill, walk on over, I'll show you the page. Representative Davids can show you the page too, where one of the tax credits, again, a married person only has to earn $200,000, but we're going to ask all the renters on average, to give up $103 to those folks. So that's how it works. We're going to have a big, long line of senior citizens and disabled who are going to hand over their $103 checks to all these other businesses because that's the priority of the majority. And members, look at the spreadsheet. It's crystal clear who's benefiting, who's paying. Who's benefiting is not these people we need to lure here to create a new job, Mr. Speaker. It's for people who already are here. This whole speech Representative Viskins gave about Texas, there isn't a dime in here for somebody in Texas. This is to give every business, just fly over the state in a helicopter and look down, every building, everywhere, some money from the renters. That's what this bill does. It's not saying come here and we'll give you a tax credit because you create a job. It's not the fancy, it's not the footloose companies. It's bricks and mortar. They're here now. And Representative Downey's right, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. We owe all of our Minnesota businesses a huge thank you. Representative Downey's actually right. But I'll tell you what, because I sat through all 10 hours of testimony, and I didn't hear once a single business in Minnesota, whether it was a member of NFIB, the Chamber of Commerce, Minnesota Business Partnership, any business say, please give me a tax cut and make renters pay for it. Not a one. And I will thank the business community, because when they were asked at the microphone, is it the right way to give you a tax cut is to ask the people who are disabled and senior citizens who earn under $55,000 a year, 66,000 of whom, your constituents members, are going to lose their renter's credit forever. Just like last year, all the homeowners lost their homestead credit forever. The business community, when they were asked, is this the right way for you to get your handout, your tax cut, your tax preference, pick your poison on the pejorative. It's either positive or negative. Everything from corporate welfare to thank you job creators. I don't care what you call it. But when they were asked, is it okay that the disabled and senior citizens who are barely getting by should pay for your tax cut? They did not say yes. It was silent. Or we're silent on how you pay for the bill. We're here to advocate for tax cuts for us. This bill is a choice, members. The bill has $1 billion ongoing kind of fantasy built in here. I mean, why even pay for any of it? Why even go after the renter's credit? I mean, it's just kind of silly. But the fact is, a yes vote on this bill, members, is taking from folks who are not homeowners. And they live in your district, and they're voters. Some of us, we know our aunts or uncles or grandparents, or the person who is, has to live in an assisted living facility because they live in a wheelchair. They're going to pay for it. That's who's going to pay for it. So Representative Downey, thank them. Say thank you to them. Tell the people, Representative Downey, you have a beautiful community, and we're neighboring cities, and we've probably spent a lot of time in each other's cities. And so when I take a walk at Centennial Lakes Park in your district and I look at all those apartments around it, they all get the renter's credit, Representative Downey. So thank them. Thank them. Because they're going to give their renter's credit now to, just across the street, Jamba Juice. And they're going to give their renter's credit to Best Buy. So thank them, Representative Downey. Don't forget them. And I will thank the business community in the sense that they never once ever said, make those who are disadvantaged in Minnesota pay for my tax cut. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Lewin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We've had a lot of interesting debate on people's perspectives on this tax bill, but I have to thank our chair, who I think did a very good job at looking at our economy, at our business climate, and looking at our tax structure, and trying to see what we can do within the limits of a very difficult budget situation to say how can we position ourselves to continue to grow out of this recession, to grow jobs, and to add economic opportunity and growth back into the state of Minnesota. And I think this tax bill accomplishes much of that. And contrary to some of the points you may have heard raised, I want to go back and talk about a couple of studies that have been referenced, because we get the benefit of a lot of studies and a lot of academic documents when you serve on the tax committee. And I'll reference just a couple of things and why I think this bill is so important. You can look at whatever study or institute you want to, but I've got three just in front of me right now with regards to the business climate in Minnesota. The Public Policy Institute of New York State, their rankings of state business tax climate, and this was from a couple of years ago, puts Minnesota for overall rank 41 out of 50. Not so great. 2001 Business Tax Index, state ratings, Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, small businesses, 50, Minnesota 50 out of 50 states, right at the bottom. The Tax Foundation recently came out with their rankings, Minnesota 45th out of 50. Okay, we can talk about big, giant, shiny buildings and corporations, but, look across the board. We are not doing so hot compared to a lot of other states. And that is not the only competition that our businesses and our job creators face. So, setting that aside, I think this bill does a good job for a couple of reasons. One is that for all the discussions about big corporations, most of these provisions are targeted at small businesses. Something like 98% of all business enterprises organized in the state of Minnesota are small businesses, and they provide about half of the jobs in the state. But you look at things like the Research and Development Tax Credit, which we now allow for people organized with small businesses. Okay, we bumped that credit up just a little bit. And even the Commissioner of Revenue, Commissioner Franz, has talked about the Research and Development Tax Credit as something we want to look at doing because we want high-tech jobs in our state. These are really good-paying jobs. These are jobs that attract workers with skills and education levels that provide the kind of incomes that we want to have in Minnesota. And if you look at what a lot of our other states are doing in this across the country, with this little modest bump, we're still not really even in the game. 4.5%. When states around us are 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, all those big players in the high-tech arena completely outpace us. This is a very modest step in that direction. And getting directly to the very vigorous debate on the statewide property taxes. I want to talk a little bit about the tax incidence study. This is something we discussed at great length in the committee. And quote from a few pages there. We talk about trying to have a more progressive tax system. And we do that to a pretty good degree in Minnesota, and I know some folks would like to see it more progressive, but we look at those things pretty carefully. What kind of taxes are regressive? What is progressive? What is least harmful to people at the bottom of the income and earnings scale? And we try to have our tax code reflect that. But if you look at page 32 of the tax incidence studies and you talk about business taxes, and I quote, are partially shifted onto consumers through higher prices and in some cases to labor in lower wages. Business taxes are regressive, and number one on that list is business property taxes. And if you look at our overall tax structure right now, where we get taxes from, the share of business taxes as a percentage of all taxes, state and local, coming from businesses, again, in 2008 was 21.7%, projected to grow to 22.9% in 2013. That share is growing, so that regressive tax is growing. And at the same time, the percentage projected from homeowner property taxes after refunds is decreasing, projected, down to 16%. Sales taxes decreasing to 13%. Income taxes projected to rise slightly. So income tax is still the largest component of our tax system. But behind that is business taxes, and they are regressive. Read the study. So when you talk about what is driving the cost of goods and services in our economy, a lot of it is the burden that we place on businesses. Commercial industrial property taxes are paid by every business across the state, profitable or not. You can make not one dime of profit and pay property taxes, just like you have to pay your mortgage and your property taxes whether you made money last year or not. The businesses are hit a couple of different ways. They pay their local property taxes to their city. They also are hit with a statewide property tax that goes to the state just because they happen to be located in the state of Minnesota. Doesn't go to the businesses in my area, doesn't go to the city of Eden Prairie to pay for the roads and the police and the fire. It goes to the state to be redistributed. And that's the same for all of you. So if you want to talk about our tax structure and that, and concern for renters, and I know we want to be concerned about people who are seniors and disabled, and care was taken to have a separate schedule for those folks, that 1/3 of those renters we're talking about, to try to offer protection to them. But to increase or to continue to burden businesses basically just says to those folks, we're going to give you a credit here, but that money's going to come right back out of your pocket and go to the increased costs of the goods and services you procure at that little business down the street. So we're putting money in one pocket, but it's coming right back out the other side. So let's think about the interactions when we do these things. It's not all done in a vacuum or a silo. All of these things interact and play a role in what kind of tax structure we have and how much help we're really giving people. So again, Mr. Chair, I think you've done a fine job here. Some things that we have been arguing for as long as I've been here, and I know a lot longer, and are bipartisanly supported. The upfront exemption for sales tax on capital equipment. I mean, this is something everybody agrees on. The problem is the little price tag at the front is hard to do. So we're going to take a whack at it in a small piece. For really small businesses, 20 or fewer employees, $1 million or fewer in sales, are not going to have to pay those taxes and then fill out reams of paperwork and wait months, maybe a year to get that refund. That's a really good provision and something we all ought to support. So, members, with any big piece of legislation, folks can pick it apart and find things not to like about it. But if we are going to be serious about trying to position Minnesota to try to continue to recover, to try to grow private sector jobs, which is really how we're going to get out of this recession and get back into a very firm fiscal footing, we've got to do a few things differently. And I think it starts with lightening the burden, particularly on our small business owners. And second, looking at this tax structure. Is this really the best way to levy taxes? Because I can tell you who's paying those commercial industrial property taxes that are levied on business in small towns and bigger cities. It's coming from the customers that frequent those businesses. They are paying those taxes. I urge members to support this good bill.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Speaker and members. I just want to highlight a couple of things. Last year here, I've had a chance to talk to citizens across the state of Minnesota and actually hear a lot of that testimony within the tax committee. And I think one that has really stuck with me just happened about, I think it was just a week ago. We had the city of Moorhead come before the tax committee and talk to us about the realities of having North Dakota right across the border from them. They're dealing with the issue of having a tax structure that's not friendly to them and what that means for businesses in their community. And it's a real struggle. If you happen to live in the middle of the state, you don't have those kind of day-to-day challenges. But they're in a position where every day they have the threat of businesses leaving to go right across the border to North Dakota. And as we heard in tax committee, North Dakota is considering elimination of their property tax. How are the people in Moorhead supposed to compete with something like that? I can't think of a single business person that wouldn't see that as an opportunity to grow jobs and be in a place that says, we welcome you here. I think we as a state can do things differently. I've heard similar stories from constituents within my own district. I want to share a couple of them with you. There's a Plymouth business, has 800 employees. But out of those 800 employees, guess how many are in Minnesota? 100. The remaining 700 employees are in other states. And the reason they give is this. In Minnesota, business taxes are too high. The amount of regulation is out of this world, among other things. Another company, just last year, pulled up 250 jobs out of the city of Plymouth and moved them to South Dakota and Nebraska. We have 250 less jobs in the city of Plymouth and an empty building to go along with it. We need to start changing our attitude in this state. We need to start saying to our businesses, we want you to be here. We want you to grow. This bill does that. Between the angel investor tax credit, which is a bipartisan issue. It wasn't just but a couple years ago, Representative Dabney brought this issue to the House floor, and we worked together on this issue. We have the opportunity to make that even better, and we will be building more jobs for the citizens in this state. Jobs that will help them pay their bills, help them pay for their health care, help their kids go to school. We also help out small businesses that are startup companies on the net operating loss provision of Representative Mazerall. And there's a host of other provisions in this bill that will get Minnesota on the right track. I think we all want the same goal, and that's to have a healthy economy. And I tell you what, folks, I can't be prouder of this bill than I am at this moment. It's the step in the right direction. It puts Minnesota on the path to long-term economic growth for the citizens of our state. Please vote yes.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And, you know, I have to say, as we do sometimes in Croatian, nemoj ništa zamiriti. Don't take offense. I was up late last night, and I might be a little cranky. But I didn't talk last night, so I get a little extra time tonight, you know. So let me start by saying, we say tomato, you say tomato, we say potato, you say tomato, we say millionaires, you say job creators. Isn't that something? A new word. Job creators. But they never create any jobs. We gave them, I think 42% of the $1 billion tax cut in 1999 and 2000 were the jobs. China? Pakistan? Where are they? You know, when I stand up on this floor and talk about class warfare, Ron Abrams would stand up and, boy, remember how irate he would get, members, for those of you here? Talk about class warfare. We've got it here. $550 million taken away from poor people and middle-income people. Last year in the homestead credit, because Representative Lincheski and helped me out, do those millionaires, those job creators, those millionaires, did they lose the homestead credit? No. No. How many people in Edina lost the homestead credit? And now it's not bad enough. You got to take $67 million this year, pluck it out of poor Mrs. What was her name? Mrs. Dembski. Remember Mrs. Dembski in the tax committee? I didn't want to embarrass her, so after she got done testifying, I went up to her and I said, ma'am, do you mind if I ask you, how much do you live on a month? She's the lady that works 4 hours a day. She's on Social Security, and she's got to work 4 hours a day because she's got an apartment in St. Paul that costs her $600 a month to live in, and she makes $1,200 working 4 hours a day plus Social Security. And you took her $800 a year, she told me, that she got last year, that she puts in her right into her savings account to buy drugs she needs to live on. No. My good friend, Representative Downey, I love him. You know, he's from Edina. I'm just a dummy from the range. He's a sophisticated, or as my range friends that drop the first syllable once in a while would say, sophisticated gentleman from Edina. Would you yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Rukavina.
Representative Downey, please explain to this dummy how taking $67 million away from renters, almost all of them poor, taking 500 and I think to be exact $38 million away from middle income people last year, how that is progressive. Can you explain that to me? I don't understand. This progressive libertarian from the range doesn't understand what the conservative from Edina is telling me.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Rukavina. I think you got to look at the bill in its entirety. The fact that we are eliminating an $800 million per biennium regressive tax, you can do some rough math. The regressive tax, on balance, has to come out of the lower income proportion of taxpayers in order for it to be judged as regressive. So, in fact, over half of that $800 million tax cut, that business tax cut, is going right back to the lowest income people in Minnesota. They're the ones who pay it. It's a regressive tax. We're cutting it. We're cutting $1 billion, $800 million a year regressive tax. Those are low income people who pay that. I never voted to raise taxes on low income people. I didn't vote to raise the statewide sales tax, which is a regressive tax. I didn't vote to raise tobacco taxes, which is a regressive tax. I didn't vote to raise a sales tax for a stadium in Hennepin County. I'm not going to vote to raise a tax for the Viking Stadium. I didn't vote to raise the gas tax. I didn't vote to raise the tab fees. Those are all regressive taxes. Those are taxes that hit right at the lowest income folks. We're cutting one of the most regressive taxes there is. And we could do an incidence report on this whole tax bill, and I'm guessing it would probably improve the progressivity of our tax code. The bulk of that money and that business property tax relief is going right to those same folks. So I look at it in its entirety and say, this is absolutely a tax cut for low and middle income Minnesotans in its entirety. Absolutely.
Representative Rukavina.
If Representative Downey would continue to yield, I don't, Representative Downey, agree with you, because a lot of that tax is passed on to people all over the country. We're the bigger corporations. But Representative Downey, would you yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Rukavina.
Representative Downey, do you believe that government doesn't create jobs?
Representative Downey.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Did you say that government doesn't or does create jobs? I
said, do you believe government... Well, let's put it this way. Does government create jobs?
Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Rukavina, it is true that there are employees of government. However, the money that goes to pay those employees first came out of the private sector economy first, and so every dollar that gets spent down here in the public sector is a dollar that didn't get spent somewhere else in the economy. And so I think those of us who are more fiscally conservative say, you know, there's a whole handful of things that we are obligated to do in state government. A lot of good things, a lot of important things, and we're willing to take money out of the private sector and deploy it for public purposes where that makes sense. But to say that government creates jobs, it's just not true. Everything we do down here is paid for by somebody out in the private sector, and there's an opportunity cost to that. Something does not happen in the private sector every time we spend a dollar down here. So on the net, there is a no net job increase to every dollar we spend down here in state government. We're just moving it around.
Representative Rukavina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I told you how sharp he was, because he knew where I was going. Because I know, and I don't have to even ask you to yield, because you can just nod, what your father did for a living. Your father was a well-liked and respected teacher at the Edina School District, and a swimming coach, I might add, too. And Representative Downey and I always got to, you know, be nosy and dig a little bit, so I even got out of him the other day that his grandfather worked for the Department of Transportation. 2 generations of government jobs. We got to get you a janitor's job at the Capitol when you leave. But, yeah, oh, that's right, we outsourced that. I forgot in last year's bill. Sorry. You know, it's the same. I see my good friend Representative Cornish left the floor because I was going to ask him if the government created jobs too, because I think he's had 3 of them now from the government, but that's okay. He's gone. Members, no. You know, you look at the income of the revenue from the state of Minnesota, and last year 51% of our dollars came from the individual income tax. 30% came from the sales tax. And you're right, Representative Downey, I opposed and spoke against in my district and had the highest vote against the sales tax increase. And I didn't want to put it in the Constitution. I've been kind of consistent in that area. I don't want anything in the Constitution. I voted and I campaigned against taking the sales tax on motor vehicles and giving it to the Department of Transportation. You know, so I've been more consistent than I think almost anybody on this floor. Somebody's handing me a note telling me to shut up probably. Let me see. Okay. Corporate income tax is 6%. A meager 6% of our income. And like Representative Lesch pointed out, I think federally, 66, 2/3 of corporations pay 0 in taxes. But, you know, in this bill, and we're taking, you know, that money that I talked about, $67 million this year, $74 million next year, $80 million the following year, plucking it right out of the hands of people like Ms. Dembski, and at the same time giving it to the business community. And we're giving a break to the seasonal rec owners too. The problem is, and I won't ask my good Iron Range friend Representative McElpatrick to yield for a question because I like her too much, and she told me I couldn't pick on her, so I won't. I'll let Anselts do that. He's running against her. But anyway, Representative McElpatrick and let's see, who's Representative Howes walking up there? Who else on that side? Representative Hancock. In this bill, they give your seasonal rec owners a break because that was the deal back in 2001 when Ron Abrams put them on the statewide school district tax with the businesses when Edina got money for the first time. But they don't let you tax them when it comes to an operating levy, which was part of the deal. The only property wealth, Representative McElpatrick, that you have in Aiken School District and in Grand Rapids and Deer River, probably 30-40%, Representative Anselts might be able to help me out here, of your total property wealth, and they give them a tax cut in the bill, but they don't let you tax them to keep your schools running. You know, it's just crazy how you can be all over the board. And we cut those income taxes in 2000 because the job creators, the millionaires, out of $1 billion, about $800 million, I think it was, in income tax cuts, 42% went to the richest 4% of Minnesotans. Those job creators. Again, we call them millionaires over here. You call them job creators. And no jobs got created. No jobs got created. There's no jobs in this bill. And there won't be, because let me tell you what happens here with those. Again, we call them millionaires, you call them job creators. And Ms. Manzi down here has been helping me since 2002 as I keep track of the 50 richest Minnesotans. And, you know, they don't give me 50 because they can't give me 50 because I might figure out that Glenn Taylor might be in there or the Polads or somebody. I don't know. Maybe Greg Davids is in there. That's right. Greg's raising his hand. And you should be proud of it, my friend. You know. But in 2002, the richest 55 Minnesotans, the poorest one had adjusted gross income of $11 million. And they had a total income, 55 people, of $1.281 billion. Job creators. We call them millionaires. You call them job creators. They didn't create any jobs. By 2005, they gave me 59 names here. Richest 59. You know, I think 6 of them live in Edina. Maybe I'm guessing. I don't know. But there's 59 in 2005. Listen to this. From 2002 to 2005, when we were telling public employees there's no money for you to get a raise, teachers, no money for you to get a raise, those richest 59 people, their collective income went from $1.281 billion to $2.421 billion. It doubled. By 2007, before the crash, or excuse me, I'll go to 2008 because they're still paying taxes on part of $3.452 billion. Now we're up to 60 people. 10 of them live in Edina, I think, now by then. You know, who had that kind of income growth if you were just a common, ordinary, middle-class Minnesotan, and particularly if you were a school teacher in Edina? Because there's one that taught with your father. Did your income triple in 3 years in Edina? You were a bad negotiator for the union. And then the crash came, and yes, those people lost money. They lost a lot of money. But by 2012, this year, and the numbers aren't in, but the forecast is in, and the forecast says they're going to be making the same again. Now we're down to 57 people that they made in 2007. They're at $2.621 billion. They can't pay taxes. No, they can't. Representative Carlson, I got a little sleep and I remembered your name today. I forgot it yesterday. They can't pay taxes. We had to cut their income taxes because I guess they couldn't pay their electric bill. I don't know what the problem was. But I know one problem. They didn't create any jobs. They got all the breaks. They didn't create any jobs. And that's what you keep doing. This is class warfare at its worst. I wish Representative Garofalo is here yet. We had this discussion the other day in taxes. How you people help the middle class and we stick it to them. And I didn't agree with that. And I can tell you right here, I've never seen class warfare like this in my life. And I think these 53 or 57 or 56 richest Minnesotans could afford that little proposal that the governor made. But instead, you took $538 million away from middle-class people on their property taxes. Now you're taking $67 million this year, $74 million the next, and $80 million the next away from Miss Dembski and everybody like her. No, shame on you. Shame on you. That's totally wrong. And Representative Downey, I have to just correct one thing. We didn't propose a 75-cent a pack cigarette tax and call it a fee. No. That was the guy that ran for president that couldn't beat Michelle Bachmann. That guy proposed 75 cents and he got it. And it actually is right now, let me look here, it's about 1.2% of the entire state budget. And you want to tell me that you're for the little guy? No. Potso, you want to stand up and argue with me because I'm tired now. I was up. I'm old and I can't stay up past 2 o'clock in the morning anymore. So I'm sitting down. But I'm telling you this, there are a lot of people on this floor, on that side of the aisle, that can go home and maybe they'll be like Cornish bragging about taking people's rights to vote away. But they're sure as heck going to have to justify what they did to people's homestead credits and what they did to people's renters credits and what they're doing with all the fees and fines that had to be passed on because we don't have a general fund anymore. No. I'm sitting down now. I'm going to behave the rest of the night. I'm not even talking anymore, but I'm done.
The member from Beltrami. Beltrami. Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a couple of words here, and a tough speech to follow, but I'll give it a shot. Really, I'm speaking against House File 2337, and I'll point out a few reasons why. I want to start out by referring to a comment that was made on the House floor here by my friend Representative Garofalo. I believe it was on the 15th of March, about a week ago tomorrow. Was during the school shift debate that we were having, and Representative Garofalo referred to the Republican recovery, and I wrote it down. I thought, well, this is a courageous thing to say, and I just, the first step in recovery is admitting you got a problem, and I was glad to hear Representative Garofalo say that there's a recovery going on. But then we get this bill. We've had a couple other things in the interim, but we get this bill, House File 2337, and it's crystal clear to me now that you all on the other side of the aisle, you aren't in recovery. You haven't admitted anything about having a problem here. You've got all 12 steps to go. We've got a bill in front of us that's going to take renter's credit from students and elders and disabled, and you're going to transfer that to big corporations, to companies, you're calling job creators. I got a daughter and a son who are job creators in my district. They aren't screaming at me that they need a big tax break for anything. I mean, this is, I'm not sure who all is bending your ear over there, but I'm not getting my ear bent like that. But you did insist on extinguishing the homestead tax credit. So it's clear now we're moving from extinguishing the homestead tax credit to taking renter's credit away and giving that money to big corporations. So I'm just here to remind you, and Representative Garofalo, I thank you for your courageous statements, but your steps to recovery remain intact on that ladder, and start with number one, and you will eventually get there. But just admit that you've got a problem and sticking up for big corporations and sticking it to middle-class, hard-working Minnesotans. Vote this bill down.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. Obviously, the night is getting late, so I think less is more when it comes to words. But in response to my friend Representative Rukavina, you are right that Governor Pawlenty did lose to Michelle Bachmann, but that's not as bad as Paul Thiessen losing to you in the race for governor.
The member from Anoka, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Did you say the member from Hennepin? Members, I take a different approach to this bill. I think what you need to look at in determining whether to vote for it or against it is how much does it cost and what are you buying with what it costs. I have a bone to pick with every single Democrat and Republican on the House floor who use the word job creators to refer to businesses. Consumers create jobs. The people, our constituents, create jobs. When they are economically healthy and they go to businesses in our communities and they can afford to buy things, that's when businesses in our community go out and hire more people to take care of more sales. And so when you look at this bill, look at the cost of the bill is taking $600 million from middle class, senior, and disabled Minnesotans to give $2 billion in tax cuts to corporations. And corporations are an important part of Minnesota's economy. I work for a corporation. It's obviously very important that we have them in our community. But the question isn't, would we all like to give them a tax cut right now? The question is, in this bill, would you like to raise taxes on 300,000 Minnesotans to give a tax cut of $2 billion to companies? Representative Loon raised a good point that corporations pay property taxes whether they're making money or not. But so do homeowners. They pay their property taxes whether they have a job or not. This bill, surprisingly, while giving $2 billion in property tax relief to corporations, gives, I think it's like $4 million or $400,000 to homeowners. Is like barely even worth having on the spreadsheet. So I will acknowledge, Representative Loon, the point that people have to pay property taxes whether they're making money or not, but that's true of homeowners as well as businesses. And I think if we want to get jobs created in Minnesota, we need to make sure that the people who go shopping have money in their pockets and money in their bank accounts so that they can go and patronize our businesses. Members, the bill costs $600 million from taxpayers in tax increases to give $2 billion in tax cuts to corporations. I don't think it's a good deal for Minnesota, and I don't think it creates any jobs. Please vote no.
The member from Cass, Representative House.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Rukavina, you've served on the Tax Committee for many years, and you brought my name up and you talked about the cabin owners and they don't pay operating levies. You should also know then that I've been working on that issue for about 6 to 8 years, and there was a span of 4 years when I was in the minority that some of your members were working on it with me, and we had a deal with the cabin owners that they would remain neutral and or support the bill that we were moving forward. But Representative Rukavina, you controlled both bodies at that time, the Senate and the House, and your committee would not pass it. They would not take it. So, Representative Rukavina, there's blame on both sides of the aisle on that issue, but without naming names, if you look at who owns the cabins in our districts, they're either out of state or from the greater metropolitan area, and maybe that's why we can't succeed. But I want to make it clear that I have tried, and many of my Republican colleagues have tried, along with Representative Moe and Ward and everyone else up in my area. We've tried very hard. So this is a bipartisan failure on that issue.
The member from Clay, Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. You know, one thing that is not in this bill that absolutely should be in this bill is the restoration of the homestead credit. The majority last year eliminated the homestead credit. And last year, as we were talking about the bill, we were talking about this is going to raise property taxes around this state. And I heard a few members earlier talk very enthusiastically about their homeowners. But they're also the same ones that raised property taxes on their homeowners by $71 million last year. And last year there was a lot of speculation. What is the elimination of the homestead credit going to do? Well, the speculation ended when all the cities and all the counties and all the townships, all the schools, all the special districts set their final levies in December, and we now have the actual final numbers. These aren't projections. This isn't guessing. This is what actually happened. And as we know, property taxes for 2012 went up $370 million to the highest property tax level in the 154-year history of this state. And some will say, well, it's your local units of government. Well, here's what they did. If you add up all the levies, when the counties would set their property tax levy and when the school district and the township and the city would do that, the net levy increase was $80 million. $80 million, which means the majority had left the homestead credit alone. Your property taxes with that 80 and with the statewide tax going up about 20, it would have gone up about $100 million, about 1%. But in fact, property taxes went up $370 million, and $260 million of that, about 75% of the increase, directly related to the elimination of the homestead credit. And what that did, it raised property taxes on homeowners by 71%, on farmers by 52%, and on the very people they're giving credits to today, businesses, property taxes went up $133 million. And I'm a teacher, and I want to give everyone a homework assignment here. And every property tax homeowner, payer in this state, I want to give a homework assignment to. The 2012 property tax statements are going out right now. Homeowners are going to receive the 2012 property tax statement. And when you get that statement, I want you to go out and dig out your 2011 property tax statement. And you just have to look at one piece. Look at line 4A. And in 2011, it said on line 4A, homestead and agricultural market value credits. And then there's an amount up to $304. Then go to your 2012 property tax statement, and this is an example of what's sent out. This is from the Department of Revenue. And look at 4A again. The word homestead is nowhere to be seen. Vanished, gone, disappeared. The homestead credit taken away. And, you know, some homeowners, depending where you live, probably came out okay with the exclusion. Many, as we know, didn't. But if you did come out okay, take a look at what your homestead credit was back in 2011. And whatever that number was, that amount was passed on to higher property taxes to farmers or businesses, apartments, or somewhere else. Take a look. Your homestead credit was taken away. It is gone permanently. And, you know, when you look at the relief in this bill, it's all to corporations and businesses. Less than 1% go to homeowners. In fact, if you remember Ivory Soap, 99 and 44 100% pure? If you took the amount of impurities in Ivory Soap, it would be greater than the amount of homeowners' percentage in property tax relief in this bill. That's how small it is. And for ag land, nothing. This bill says to a homeowner, it says to senior citizens whose property taxes went up, families, it says, tough it, tough luck. If you're a farmer, this bill says to you, forget it. Absolutely no property tax relief. And yet in the last 10 years, homeowners' property taxes have gone up 92%. Farmland has gone up 150% in the last 10 years, and businesses 53%. So who do we give the relief to? Now, I'd like to give relief to everyone, but it's all to the business. Nothing to homeowners and nothing to farmers. And I've heard a lot of talk about job creators and the economy. Unfortunately, the majority, through this bill, does not consider farms and agriculture part of our economy. In rural Minnesota, up and down the Red River Valley and other areas, farming is a major driver of our economy. And yet that segment of the economy gets zippo, nothing in property tax relief after getting hit $52 billion of increase last year and an increase of 150% in the last 10 years. Nothing for farmlands. Rural members here, not a dime to your farmers. Not a dime. Misplaced priorities. And you know what? Representative Downey, we do owe thanks to our businesses. They're huge parts of our communities. Huge parts. But our communities don't start or end with businesses. I want to say thank you to our senior citizens, our homeowners and senior citizens who built our communities. Thank you to our veterans who fought for our nation and own homes. And in fact, I received a call yesterday from a veteran renter in Breckenridge that wanted me to fight to make sure this renter's credit wasn't cut. I want to say thanks to families and farmers for what they do for our communities. Because when we rise all of those areas, our business sector, our seniors, our families, our farmers, we all benefit and we become a stronger Minnesota. This bill leaves too many people behind who have also had property tax increases. And I want to just talk about one other area, members, and that's about geographical balance. Geographical balance. Last year, rural Minnesota, because of the elimination of the homestead credit, picked up 64% of our property tax increase. About 260-some million out of that 370, whatever 64%, that increase was paid by rural Minnesota. When you look at the stats from the last 10 years, the increase on rural property is increasing 40% higher than the metro area. And yet, in this bill that you're going to vote on, as things are phased in, rural Minnesota has less than 35% of the property tax relief. Rural Minnesota paid 64% of the tab last year. This bill provides less than 35%. So, members, this bill is about priorities, and I cannot support a bill that puts wealthy corporations over our senior citizens and our middle-class families. I cannot support a bill that leaves homeowners and farmers in the cold with no property tax relief at all. And I cannot support placing reckless and irresponsible, huge budget deficits into the future on the backs of our children. I simply cannot support that. This is misplaced priorities. We can do much better. Members, please vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lumczewski.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I didn't ever see Representative Mazerow come back, so I wanted to let him explain his bill to you, but he's not here. So, members, one of the provisions in this bill that you should understand is a provision that says if you have a company and you're losing money, you get to sell your losses to a bigger company. Just think about that for a minute. So imagine if you're a homeowner, a resident, you're in financial trouble, and you just get to sell your hard times to someone else for money. That's in this bill. Members, also in this bill are, again, sort of the Exhibit A in picking winners and losers. This is government trying to create markets. I have to ask rhetorically, where have all the capitalists gone? For goodness sakes, I thought Republicans were capitalists. I often feel I'm the only one left. There was a long time when I first came here, there was a lot of moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans who understood markets and economics and were capitalists and said, you know, what's best for people is when businesses try and some make a better product at a lower price and then we buy it so they do well, and when businesses fail, they fail, and that's how the market works, and we don't bail them out and we don't give them tax preferences and unfair advantages so they can knock out competitors, which this bill is rife with, members. Where, oh where, have the capitalists gone? Now, that's not always necessarily something my side of the aisle is that interested in, but there are certainly plenty of Democrats in Minnesota who took an economics class and understand capitalism and believe basic tenets. This bill is the antithesis of that. This bill says we're going to give all kinds of carved out deals to certain kinds of folks. We've got private retail companies in this bill that have received over $230 million of subsidy, getting more, tens of millions of dollars more. We've got people selling their losses to other companies so they don't have to go under when they should. That's what capitalism says. We've got tax credits, which is, as you watched Representative Rukavina ask Representative Downey about that, that's government trying to create jobs. That's what that is. For any of you who don't think government creates jobs, those provisions are members carrying those bills who thinks government does create jobs, and I'll carry the tax credit to make sure someone creates a job. So don't kid yourself that you're just helping business here. You're picking some businesses to help over some other businesses, and then you're making the renters of Minnesota pay for that. Members, a number of other things have been stated that I won't go into, but there's a few things that I think that have to be addressed. Representative Loon made some good points, and I hope you all listen to her. And Representative Biskins tried to make some of those points too, because they're right. Business taxes are regressive, and as I told you, homeowner and renter taxes are more regressive. But they are regressive. So, there's a hope and a prayer here going on that if we just create $1.6 billion of deficit into the future, that somebody will create a job. I would take the deal that folks over there are talking about. If we had language that said, for your tax cut, you have to create a job. It's not in there, members. You don't have to create a job in this bill. Or if it said, we'll lower the price of what we're selling you. I'd take that deal too. Here's your tax cut, McDonald's, and you get to lower the price of hamburgers. Because it's coming from the taxpayers. Or, here's your tax cut, to the auto dealers, and now you get to lower the price of the car. Or here's your tax cut to the people who make dishwashers, and now you got to sell your dishwasher for less. Or you have to create a job. That's not in here. That just says we're just going to give you money we don't have. We don't have a clue how we're ever going to get it. And we'll just, hope. I mean, Representative Biskins was talking about the ferry who would come around and I don't know do what. This bill is a delusion or an illusion. I'm not sure. But there's a reason this bill is before us now, because you haven't passed a budget resolution. And had you passed a budget resolution, this bill could not even be on this floor, members, and we all know it. Come on. It's really transparent what's going on here. This is an attempt to say we're going to talk to our base. We're going to tell them we'd give them a bunch of tax cuts we can't afford, we don't have any money for, but they'll really like us. We know it's not going anywhere. But it just sort of feels good to tell people that if we had a bunch of money lying around, which we don't, we would give it to you. You're in first place. Well, members, that's perfectly okay. I would disagree with you. I would say first place ought to be those homeowners that you took the homestead credit away from. If you got tax cuts to hand out, this isn't the place to use them. Governor Dayton gave a significantly better alternative for jobs. And Representative Gunther, I listened to you, and I listened to all of you who somehow believe this is going to create a job. If people want to create a job, if you believe government creates job, and your bill clearly says the only way we can get jobs is to do things with government. So if you believe that, use Governor Dayton's tax credit, because you know what his says is, you get a tax cut if you create a job. It's surgical, it's targeted, it costs $35 million a year, and it's paid for. You all have an $800 million a price tag bill, not paid for, that doesn't create a job. And then the most insidious part of it all is we're going to make the people who earn under $55,000 a year pay for it. Now, if we had passed a budget resolution, and I've watched Representative Carlson ask the Speaker, Representative Holberg, the Chair of Ways and Means, do you have targets? Are we going to have a budget resolution? This bill wouldn't be in order if we were doing the fiscally responsible thing. It wouldn't meet your own targets. You'd either have to cut $800 million a year for this bill to be before us, or raise revenue. But this bill doesn't either. So it's just a way to get a vote to make a political statement, I guess. Members, you have every right to make a political statement. Everybody here does. That is what this bill is. I understand, but it's the wrong priorities. Make a political statement for the people of Minnesota. Give them their homestead credit back. Stop going after folks who earn under $55,000 a year and worry about them first. Think about this long and hard. Your vote here says today that and I was trying to figure this out, members, because I don't know your districts, really well, but Representative Garofalo, I think you represent the Farmington townhomes, so those are your residents who are going to pay for this tax cut. And I'm not sure who represents Buffalo anymore. I know Representative McDonald represents Delano, but I'm not sure who replaced Representative Emmer. But the Village Place Apartments in Buffalo, those residents get to pay for this tax cut. And Representative Kiffmeyer, Evans Meadows Apartment in Elk River, all those folks get to pay for a tax cut for the businesses. And Representative Erickson, the 5th Street Court Apartments in Malacca, they get to pay for this tax cut. And Representative Davids and La Crescent, the Crestview Apartments, they get to pay for these other folks to have a tax cut. Representative Drazkowski, I finally found some in your district, the Goodview Apartments. And members, I could go on and on. I was just trying to pick some members who serve on the tax committee. Because while maybe 134 people here don't understand how the program works for people who don't own a home, the tax committee members do understand. And they've told you in your caucus you should all vote for this bill. So they're saying all these folks who reside in these buildings I've just highlighted for you should pay for all these tax cuts. And you can all think long and hard about that. I actually support making things easier for businesses in times when we can, in targeted ways that are competitive. We don't have the money for this. Everybody knows it. There is not $1.6 billion laying around. And if there were, we should give people their homestead credit back. And we certainly shouldn't be taking away people's rental refund. Members, please vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Minority Leader Thiessen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, once again, the Republicans are sticking it to the middle class. You can try to justify this bill with all kinds of rhetorical contortions, but this is what's going on in this bill. The Republicans are asking the seniors of Minnesota, people with disability, middle-class Minnesotans to line up, take $100 in their hands, and hand it over to corporations. That's exactly what is going on in this bill. How is raising $200 on middle-class Minnesotans good for our economy? That's $200 that Minnesotans would spend in their community to buy groceries for their families, to pay the bills, to pay for medicine, and you're going after the renters. Some of these Minnesotans are probably saving up to buy a house, to move up the economic ladder, but you continue to push them down. You are literally taxing the American dream away from the middle class by the actions you're taking, and it doesn't make Minnesota a better place. Now, your argument is this is somehow going to create jobs, but there is nothing in this bill but a hope and a prayer that one single job is going to be created. It is a lie to cover up the gift that you are giving to your special interest corporate friends. The average relief in this bill will be about $800 to a business, $800 a year to a business. Enough, and think about this, members, what that $800 will allow that business to do to create jobs. It will allow that business to pay someone 38 cents an hour for their jobs. Now, maybe that's the Republican vision of how we build a strong middle class. It's certainly not our vision, and it's wrong for Minnesota. And let's revisit history a little bit, members. We're coming out of a deep recession. Foreclosures that drove people out of their homes. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. Loss of hope for hundreds of thousands of people. And why? Because of the economic philosophy that you shamelessly continue to push forward on the people of Minnesota, which is, let's just get out of the way of the corporations and everything will be dandy. Well, you know what? That is the philosophy that drove this country into the recession that we saw. Getting out of the way of the big banks. We can't regulate them. We can't touch them. We can't touch corporations. Get out of their way. For the decade that we did that, not a single job was created, and it drove our country into recession. Why do you want to repeat that over and over and over again? It does not make sense. Now, it's not that we don't value those corporate citizens of Minnesota. Of course we do. Representative Downey, I'm sure with the literature that you distributed on the floor, you're not suggesting that those corporations are going to stop making donations if Representative David's bill doesn't pass. I think more highly of them than that, if that's what you're suggesting. And Representative Downey, you did tell a lot of tall tales in your speech, and you know, that's your prerogative, I guess. But the worst is the idea when you said that the Republicans are practicing fiscal sanity. None of the corporations that you're prioritizing over middle-class Minnesotans in this bill would balance budgets the way that you do. You should be embarrassed as the expert in business consulting to be even suggesting that. Your budget last year took $2.5 billion away from our schools. For the first time in our state history, you did credit card, federal-style budget deficits. You put $750 million on the credit card for one-time spending, and you're going to have to pay $1.4 billion to pay it back. And yet I imagine when the bonding bill, if it ever gets to the floor, gets here, you're going to be talking about how bad it is to put stuff on the credit card. Well, folks, you're the ones that did it in the worst way possible for the first time in state history. Is that fiscal sanity, Representative Downey? I don't think so. You cut nursing homes. You cut the disabled. You actually voted in your budget to cut funding for our schools all across this state. And you left a $4 billion hole for us to fill next year. Is that really fiscal sanity? And Representative Drazkowski, I can't let you get away with the kind of rhetoric you put on the floor tonight. When you stand up and ask and say to my constituents and Representative Wagenius's constituents, Representative Norton's constituents, Representative Downey's constituents, all the folks across this state that were willing to give your folks some tax relief and assistance to recover from the flood, which we did gladly, and then you say we don't want help from anybody else, that is just wrong, and you know it is wrong. And you got to stop that rhetoric, because it is what is driving this state into the ground. I'm going to stop with that, because you're just telling lies about what's going on in this state, and it's not right. So it's great to give gifts, folks, but we don't have the money to do it. The $4 billion hole that you are left this state in because of this, the budget that was passed after you sent the state into the longest state shutdown in history, we don't have the money to do it. The Republicans are giving a gift to their corporate CEO friends, and you're not paying for it. You're ultimately creating a $1.6 billion biennial hole in our budget. The same short-term bad budgeting as the beg, borrow, and steal and cut budget that you passed last year to get out of the state shutdown. You should be embarrassed to say that that's any kind of fiscal sanity. And just to keep it on top of everybody's mind, let's remember specifically what many of you did last year. Representative Wardlow, Representative I'll get to that in a minute. Representative Keel. Because of the elimination of the homestead credit that you voted for last year, that you passed off this House floor, 7.8% increase in property taxes due to that. Directly, not related to anything local governments did, directly to that decision that you made, that vote you took, you raised property taxes 8% on your constituents. And in other towns, that's in the cities, in the towns, the average for homes was 10.5%. That was your decision to raise property taxes directly on them. Representative Murray, in your area, in Freeborn and Mower counties, 6.5% increase on cities, 10% increase on the property taxes of people living in the towns you represent. That was the decision you made in your budget last year. Representative Lemure, and I know that you are claiming that you didn't understand what happened even though you voted for it 5 or 6 or 7 times. In the cities in your area, in Morris and Crow Wing counties, almost 6% increase in the cities and a 10.2% increase in the towns that you represent. You directly raise property taxes on those folks. Representative McElpatrick, in your area, in the taconite cities, 9.3% increase in property taxes because you voted to take away those folks' market value homestead credit. Nothing to do with the local governments because of the decision and the vote that you took. You'll have trouble explaining that to those folks, and I know you have already, but you will continue to. And in the towns, an 8.5% increase. That's what you voted for last year. That's what your priorities were last year in order to protect large corporations and the richest Minnesotans, probably most of whom don't live in your district, Representative McElpatrick. If any do, I don't know the fact. That's the decision you made to sell out your constituents in order to protect big corporations. I don't think that that's right. And what you're doing in this bill is just a continuation. You know, you would think that after doing that to the people, to your constituents, after inflicting that kind of pain on your constituents, you'd want to try to fix it this year, right? Well, you're not doing it in this bill. 99%, as we heard, of the relief is going to corporations, less than 1% to residences, and 0% relief to ag owners, to farmland. You're showing very, very clearly whose side you're on, and it's certainly not middle-class families. This is what's going on in this bill. Now I'll get to you, Representative Garofalo, Representative Wardlow, Representative Anderson. There's going to be an increase of $213, money coming right out of people's pockets, in constituents in your district, in Dakota County. 21,000 of them are going to be paying more money in order to hand it over to large corporations, to McDonald's, to BP, to all those big corporations. Representative Franzen, in Todd and Douglas counties, almost 3,000 people are going to be taking $213 out of their pocket to pay to corporations that aren't even anywhere near your district. That's what you're doing to your people. And you nod your head and say, that's okay. I guess that's okay. Wonderful. Representative Murray in Freeborn County, 1,700 folks are going to be taking money out of their pockets that they could use to buy gas, to buy groceries, to pay to corporations that aren't in your district. Representative McElpatrick, in your area, 2,270 folks, and these are just the renters that are affected by this, are going to be taking $213 out of their pocket and handing it over to big corporations. Is that what you really want to be doing in the floor? Is that representing your constituents well? I don't think so. Representative Barrett in Chisago County, 1,730 constituents are going to be paying money to big corporations. Representative Doubt in Isanti County, 1,420. Representative Crawford in Kanabec County, you're doing a little bit better. Maybe the population is smaller. 640 of your constituents are going to be taking $213 out of their pocket and handing it over to corporations, most of whom aren't even headquartered here in Minnesota. Representative Erickson, 1,160. That's what you're doing in this bill, members. You're just making the problem that you created last year worse. So here is your choice and your chance tonight. You don't have to vote for Representative David's bill. There's no rule that says as a member of the majority you got to vote for Representative David's bill. You could vote no and actually represent your constituents. You actually could do that. You could act against your leadership and their corporate bedfellows and choose to think for yourself. You could vote against this bill. You could vote no and stop sticking it to your constituents and stop sticking it to the middle class. I would encourage you to do that, members, because that's what the people that you represent expect of you. Let's do things differently and vote no.
The tax chair from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. All I can say is, well, there they go again. I have never heard such nonsense in my life. Taking away the homestead credit. Let's just look back in history just a bit. Can you say House File 130 that we gave to, thank you, that we gave to the governor? What did we do in House File 130 that Representative McElpatrick, that Representative Murray, and others voted for? Let's talk about House File 130. Oh, that was the bill that we sent to the governor that had the exact same LGACPA market value homestead credit as the Democrats passed in 2010. And what did our good governor do? And I love him. He's a wonderful person. He vetoed it. The governor vetoed local government aids at the same level that was supported the previous year, CPAs at the same level that was supported in the previous year, and the market value homestead credit. I heard on this floor today, let's bring the market value homestead credit back. Why? We sent it to the governor at the same levels that the Democrats passed it in 2010. We sent it to the governor. He vetoed it. Bring it back? We did. We funded the market value homestead credit the same levels of 2010. But governor went to, I remember sitting there in July after the Dayton shutdown. Oh yeah, that was in October when he said he wasn't going to shut state government down. Then in the State of the State address last year, we will not shut state government down. We were sitting here on the House floor on June 30th until midnight with a continuing resolution saying, Governor, let's keep this baby going. We can do her. Oh, he didn't. Then 3 weeks later, after the Dayton shutdown, what happens? The reporters ask him, well, we're confused. You're the longest shutdown in state history of Governor Dayton, and then he accepts our June 30th offer. Really? Wow. What a difference the biennium makes. We left the DFL a $2.2 billion surplus. They gave us a $6.2 billion deficit. The November forecast 2010. You know what? Members, this is a great bill. It's an awesome bill if you think about what we're doing here. We took a $6.2 billion surplus that was given, or deficit that was given to us, and we turned it into a $1.2 billion surplus. I'll run on that any day, folks. I'll go door to door. I'll go to every renter in my district and say, look at what we did. We took a $6.2 billion deficit, turned it into a $1.2 billion surplus. Just remember, House File 130. House File 130. LGAs, CPAs, market value homestead credit at the exact same levels that the Democrats had in 2010. The big tax reform bill of 2001 was supposed to lower property taxes 19%. It reduced, so we're trying to put more money in these programs so we can buy property taxes down. We were promised to go to down 19%. They went down 9%. The next year, property taxes increased 9.4%. So much for property tax reductions through government spending. Again, the state fully funded LGA and market value homestead credit, yet that year, property taxes increased 7.8%. 2012, with this terrible bill that Representative McElpatrick, Representative Murray, and others voted for, statewide property tax increased 4.6%. 4.6%. On a statewide average basis, property tax changes on existing properties, when my good friend Representative Marquardt led the property tax division, agricultural property up 15.7%. 15.7%. They say there's no jobs in this bill. The truth is that there are a lot of jobs. In fact, I would suggest that some of my good friends on this side of the aisle go to Commissioner Franz. Look, see what he said in tax committee about job creation. The research and development credit will produce jobs. Commissioner Franz will produce jobs. Members, there are a lot of jobs in this bill. One of the provisions, as we start to phase out the statewide business property tax, the reduction in Faribault County, 17.5%. So if you don't vote for this bill, you are voting against giving a 17.5% reduction in Faribault County. Olmsted County, down 19.2%. So if you don't vote for the statewide business property tax in Olmsted County, you're voting to increase it 19.2%, or not to reduce it 19.2%. Cass County, 25.4%. Beltrami, 20.2%. Itasca County, 20%. Coochin County, 20.2%. Steele County, 17.8%. Swift County, 17.6%. But those would be facts. Those would just be the facts. So for someone to say that my side of the aisle didn't vote for the market value homestead credit is just nonsensical. Because we did, and it was vetoed. We fully funded LGA to 2010 levels, House File 130 did, and the county program aid was at 2010 levels also. So, you know, the comments are great, the speeches are great, but facts are facts. And with that, members, I would be remiss if I didn't make some thank yous to some folks in this body. I would like to really thank Representative Lincheski, the lead DFL member of the Tax Committee. It's really great to work with you, Representative Lincheski. It really is. Vice Chair Loon, you're awesome. Thanks for your help. Property Tax Division Chair Runbeck, you did a great job. You put a lot of hours in your committee. The whole committee really worked hard. Representative Mark Hort, thank you. Thanks for your work on the property tax division. And I really have been blessed to have surrounded myself, or to have been surrounded with the A-team. Committee Administrator Bobby Patrick VI. Committee Legislative Assistant Anna Fournier. Republican Research Stephen Rubis. DFL Research Katie Sen. Property Tax CLA Becky Gomatz. Thank you. Thanks for all the work you did. DFL members, Republican members of the Tax Committee, we put a lot of time in. We did a lot of work. We didn't agree on everything, but we have a bill that I'm looking very much forward to putting a green vote up on the board. House Fiscal, Ms. Temple and Ms. Schill, thanks for helping us with the numbers. I want to thank the committee pages. Couldn't run a committee without you. Thank you very much. And, you know, I've got the A-team around me, and I've got another A-team around me. Joel Michael, wow. What can you say about Joel Michael? Nina Manzi, Stephen Hines, Pat Dalton, thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to cast a green vote on this bill, and I'm looking forward to going to conference committee, working with the governor. And the governor said it best in his State of the State. He said, look at my good ideas, we'll look at your good ideas, and we'll put something together that's best for the state of Minnesota, and I believe we can do that. And I know there's some folks that might vote red over here, but I'd appreciate some greens too, because you'll never feel bad for doing the right thing. We'll just leave it at that. Thanks so much, members.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. Clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes, 62 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Its title is agreed to. Calendar for the day. Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves the calendar for the day be continued. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Motions and resolutions. There's a copy of this order of business at the House desk and online. If there are no objections, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail.
House moves that House File 1981 be recalled from the Committee on Governmental Operations and Elections and re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Member from Cass, Representative House, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to say that this is my fault involved with the bonding committee, and I did not ask for a hearing in Representative Pepin's committee, and I asked today and begged and pleaded, but she did not have time. I talked to her. I talked to Representative Nelson, the lead. This bill is House File 1981. I don't know what it is in the Senate. It's on the General Register in the Senate. It's a pretty neutral bill. It deals with townships. I would appreciate your support in sending this to the Rules Committee, and I will leave it there until the Senate passes their bill. Thank you.
Discussion to the House motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the House motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Announcements. Announcements. Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Thursday, March 22nd, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, adjourns until 3 p.m. Thursday, March 22nd, 2012. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Representative Dean.
Move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. Thursday, March 22nd, 2012.